Chapter 1 of Wood Finishing, comprising staining, varnishing, and polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Wood Finishing, comprising staining, varnishing, and finishing by Paul Hasluck. Processes of finishing wood. By French polishing and spirit varnishing, or both in combination, household furniture and many other things are covered with a lac solution, with the object of giving them a polished mirror-like surface, showing the beauty and figure of woods to the best advantage. By painting, the latter qualities are hidden, and to an extent the cabinet maker's skill has been so much labor in vain. The surface, as it comes from the cabinet maker's hands, shows an unfinished article to which dust and finger marks would soon give a dirty appearance. Staining is a process of imparting to the surface of wood a color different from its natural one. Staining requires no preliminary preparation, the stain being applied directly to the wood. Most stains raise the grain of the wood to a considerable extent, so before applying varnish it is necessary to sandpaper the wood enough to render the grain smooth again. This sometimes involves the use of a second coat of stain, after which the sandpaper must be again applied. To simply stain a piece of wood in a uniform tint and to produce a gloss by coats of varnish is not all that is required in these modern days of keen competition, and this is particularly true in the case of furniture of the medium and higher grades. The method of finishing most suitable for woodwork depends on circumstances. For coarse work, varnish does very well, but for articles of furniture, French polishing is to be preferred, as finer results can be obtained by it. In addition to these methods, we have oil and wax polishing processes, which are to be preferred for some kinds of work, and which are treated on in a later chapter. Choice articles of furniture, from the substantial sideboard to the flimsy fretwork ornament, may be varnished instead of polished, but such a well-finished surface cannot be got with a simpler and easier process, which is also more expeditious. To distinguish that which will be worth polishing properly, and that for which a coat of varnish is sufficient, must be left to the reader's consideration, but he will get better results from careful varnishing than from badly executed polishing, though the simple wax polishing described on page 50 can be done by anybody who has patience. Furniture made from pine may be considered the only kind which it is proper to varnish, though even this is sometimes French polished. However, unless particularly well made and finished, it is not customary to polish it. Its appearance is improved by polishing, like that of other woods, but as the chief advantage in pine furniture is its cheapness, varnishing is supposed to be good enough for it. The process of japanning, by which much of the cheaper kinds of pine furniture is finished, is similar to painting. This handbook will be confined to processes in which the grain or natural figure of the wood is simply brought out and improved by a transparent covering. Mahogany, walnut, and all the finer woods used in making furniture should be polished in order to make them look their best. The novice must form his own opinion as to when he ought to finish by polishing and when by varnishing. A glossy surface on wood is often described indifferently as varnish or polish, and to a certain extent rightly so. An expert has no difficulty in distinguishing the mode of finishing which has been adopted for a piece of woodwork, but it is not easy to explain the distinction. He would not confound the two terms, polish and varnish, but if asked to point out the difference, he would probably say in effect that varnish is laid on with a brush, while French polish is applied by means of a rubber, an explanation which will bear supplementing. In order to arrive at a clearer idea of the difference between the two processes, it will be well to understand the action of a varnish. Varnish is applied in a liquid state, and this liquid is a solvent for the gum or resin used. The surface of the work is coated with the varnish. The solvent evaporates, leaving a film of the resin which was dissolved in it. Wood, or anything else so treated, is said to be varnished. The medium used to obtain a French polished surface, although really only a varnish, is one of a much finer kind that is generally suggested by that word. French polish might be described as a special varnish for French polishing. However, both the finished gloss and the material by means of which the gloss is produced are commonly spoken of as French polish. The material is thin varnish, which experience has shown to be most suitable for producing a fine, smooth, glossy surface by the French mode of polishing. In the furniture trade, the cabinet maker, the upholsterer, and the polisher are distinct persons, each often totally unfamiliar with any branch of the business beyond his own special one. But is there any sound reason for this being the case? The furniture trade artisan who is able to do polishing and all that appertains to it will command a better market for his labor than he who ignores everything outside his particular groove. This applies more especially to those in country districts, but even in the larger centers of population, facility in more than one branch of a trade cannot fail to be of advantage. The celebrated Vernis Martin, which means simply Martin's varnish, produced a very fine finished surface by means of some material or manipulation which the inventor kept a secret, and which is said to have died with him. This, however, seems improbable, for it is reasonable to suppose that his success induced others in the same line of business to imitate, and the result is French polish. This present-day French polish is Vernis Martin as nearly as we know how to imitate it. Martin's materials and his mode of producing the gloss or polish were, probably, different from ours, but he made his reputation by the somewhat cumbersome processes of smoothing or polishing a varnish. But the simpler process, now known as French polishing, is sufficient for practical purposes, and only those prompted by curiosity will care to try a more tedious way of getting similar effects. At the same time, it must not be assumed that there is no more progress to be made in the art of wood polishing. The polisher of today is called upon to do many difficult jobs. It is not enough for him to be able to put a clear, bright polish on anything that may be brought to him. He must be able to match the various colored woods, giving to the whole an appearance of carefully selected and joined veneers. Here a knowledge of how to use chemicals, stains, and dyed polishes must be brought into use. Some parts may require to be made darker, dark parts may have to be made lighter, or oak may have to be treated so as to present an appearance of age. The unvarnished and unpainted oak fittings of stables have been noticed to change from their light color to a rich brown. Observant minds have traced this result to ammoniacal fumes. Acting on this principle, many oak articles are given an appearance of age or enriched in color by shutting them up for a time in a cupboard or airtight box on the bottom of which has been placed an open dish of liquid ammonia. Failing a suitable cupboard in which to do this, chemistry comes to our aid, and we get a like result by wiping over with a solution of bichromate of potash, common soda, or lime water. With careful management and by the aid of these and dyed polishes, common bay wood or plain mahogany can be made to look equal to Spanish mahogany. The colored stringings or inlays with their many-colored woods found round workboxes and on writing desks are not all real. The polisher and the chemist have played their respective parts, and there are musical boxes, etc., with imitation pearl inlays and stringing, which is simply bird's eye maple dyed green, verdigris and vinegar being mostly used for this. Again, flowers, birds, etc., may be painted on the panels of doors, or failing ability to paint, it is possible to get transfers that look exceedingly well when polished over. Or birds, flowers, and such may be cut out from thin paper and fastened to the work with thin polish or varnish, giving them, when dry, a coat of white, hard varnish, which can be polished after first sizing the pictures with isinglass. Polishing partakes a good deal of the nature of an art. Skill is necessary to make a good polisher, as well as knowledge about the materials and their manipulation, and this skill, of course, is only to be acquired with practice. Some people regard French polishing as a mystery rather than an art to be acquired. When the novice tries to do the work himself, the refusal of the polish or gloss to come up under his hands is indeed mysterious. French polishing looks such easy, almost lazy work, albeit somewhat tending to dirty the hands, that the baffled novice may be pardoned for thinking he has got hold of the wrong stuff, or that he has been misdirected, and though either of these circumstances may be the cause of failure, it is much more likely to be owing to want of skill. Possibly the foregoing remarks may have a discouraging effect on the novice, but everything will be done in these pages to remove difficulties and to indicate right methods of working. The rest will depend upon himself. The beginner, however, clever as he may be, must not expect to finish his work as well as those who have had years of experience, and he need not be discouraged if his first attempts do not reach his expectations. The instructions in this handbook will at least explain to beginners what they ought to do, and it is hoped that even the more advanced will find in it suggestions which will lead to increased skill. End of Chapter 1, read by Bryce Cries.
Chapter 2 of Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing by Paul Hasluck. Processes of staining wood. Staining may be said to be divided into three classes. A. The staining of deal or common woods to match the better class, such as ebony, walnut, rosewood, mahogany, etc. B. The darkening of natural wood to imitate a superior class, as, for example, common oak to match brown or pollard oak, common bay wood to match best mahogany. C. Decorative work, such as the imitation of inlaid woods, etc. Some persons who lay claim to good taste strongly object to staining wood, on the ground that it gives an appearance that is not natural. All painted woodwork has the beauty of the woods entirely covered. In all bare woodwork, staining has probably played an important part in the decorative treatment. Even wood of the finest quality that money can buy, no matter how carefully selected and joined, will be treated when it passes through the French polisher's hands with some staining medium, in the form of red oil, colored filling in, dyed polish, varnish, or stain, to bring out the beauty of the woods and to show the cabinet maker's handiwork to the best advantage. When veneers are used in furniture manufacture, the chances that stain is used are doubled. In modern marquetry or inlaid work, it will be found that the woods employed are not all real. The old exponents of marquetry have left excellent specimens, in which only three kinds of wood are used, but the range of colors and shading as now used is much greater. Many persons prefer to use the commoner kinds of wood in the manufacture of their household furniture, and by staining these to imitate closely the more expensive wood. This chapter is written chiefly for the benefit of such people. It is recommended that those stains which, though useful enough in their way, require acids or chemical and special apparatus should be avoided, as the same end can be gained by other and simpler means. There are two methods of staining. A. Surface staining, in which, as the name implies, the staining is effected by compounds, in the nature of pigments, laid upon the surface like paint, and forming a thick, opaque coating, which does not, to any considerable degree, penetrate the fiber of the wood. B. Body staining, in which the stain is usually applied as a thin wash, which, entering the pores of the wood, colors it to some little depth below the surface. To make stains penetrate very deeply into wood is neither an expeditious nor a simple process to those unaccustomed to the work. For ordinary purposes, body staining is quite sufficient. There are many stains, made both in liquid and in powder. Most of these are cheap and reliable. 1 gallon of liquid stain will cover 100 square yards, and after buying a small sample bottle and finding it suitable, one can rely upon getting a further supply to match. This is not always so with homemade stains. Stains in powder are more convenient for carrying. The only solvent needed is water, so they are easy to use and valuable for stenciling and decorative purposes. It is not for furniture alone that these stains may be used. No reason appears against their more extensive use for interior decoration in preference to painting and graining. Suppose a floor margin is to be stained, and it is desired to have a pattern of a darker shade around the inner edge, as shown in the illustrations which appear on page 78. It is easy to take up a little powder stain and mix with water to the consistency of thin paint and apply by means of a stencil plate and brush, as would be done with distemper. In order to show up stained work to the best advantage, the woodwork is required to be of superior class and free from sap. This is an extra expense in the first instance. On the other hand, it is less expensive to keep the wood fresh and clean when stained than it would be to apply successive coats of paint, then grain and varnish. Dealers sell combined stains and varnish as a means of simplifying the process. One material will often do duty for shades varying from light oak to dark walnut, the light shade being grained by one coat, successive coats giving darker shades, and consequently thicker surface, a process which cannot be commended. Although cheap and simple, these combined stains and varnishes cannot be recommended for hard wear. Being mixed in varnish, the stain does not penetrate the fibers of the wood to the same extent as when applied alone. When these combined stains and varnishes are used, the cheaper class should be avoided, as the soft resinous varnish employed will readily show scratches and marks. Most druggists sell aniline dyes in packets and in tubes, which may be usefully employed on wood for self-colors only, as distinct from various imitations of woods. Their introduction has had a disastrous effect on the old vegetable dye market. Orchella wood, madder, safflower, and turmeric, mentioned old recipes, are now practically unsaleable, and dealers generally do not keep them in stock. Nevertheless, vegetable stains are exceedingly useful. Aniline dyes are of two kinds. One dissolves in water, the other in spirits, but they have a tendency to fade on exposure to light. To the former, a little vinegar, which has the property of preventing this fading to a great extent, can be added. To mix aniline dyes with varnish, they must be dissolved in spirits, to use with a spirit varnish or naphtha finish. They are only partially successful in oil varnish or painter's varnish. The quantity required to stain a pint of varnish must be a matter of experiment, as so much depends on the covering quality of the varnish, and whether the tone required is to be got in 1, 2, or 3 applications. Marquetry work can be very closely imitated by means of stains only, the stains used being purely vegetable. It is claimed that the stains are durable and that they leave no smell or stickiness. Each bottle of stain, medium, preparing solution, and polish may be bought for about 6d. Neat little boxes containing 7 stains and the 3 other requisites are also prepared and sold for about 5s. The colors employed include walnut, mahogany, ebony, green, red, yellow, rosewood, satinwood, gray, olive, blue, and crimson. The large number of colors that can be obtained from dye woods, which include logwood, red sanders, madder, fustic, orchella wood, safflower, sandalwood, socotrine aloes, Barbados aloes, and nut galls, is worth noticing. Many are to be obtained from common plants growing in abundance almost everywhere. The well-known blueberry, when boiled down with a little alum and a solution of copperas, will develop an excellent blue color. Treated in the same manner with a solution of nut galls, it produces a dark brown tint. With alum, verdigris, and sal ammoniac, various shades of purple and red can be obtained from it. The fruit of the elderberry, so frequently used for coloring spirits, will also produce a blue color when treated with alum. The privet, boiled in a solution of salt, furnishes a serviceable color, and the overripe berries yield a serviceable red. The seeds of the common spindle tree, when treated with sal ammoniac, produces a beautiful purple red. The bark of the currant bush, treated with a solution of alum, produces a brown. Yellow is obtained from the bark of the apple tree, the box, the ash, the buckthorn, the poplar, the elm, etc., when boiled in water and treated with alum. a lively green is furnished by the broom-corn. The art of marquetry wood staining offers scope for the display of artistic designs and for the development of the purely manual faculties, and its suitability for amateurs is becoming generally known. The requisite apparatus is neither large nor costly. The work can be made effective and generally novel, and any kind of wood may be utilized, though holly, sycamore, and lime are the best varieties. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing by Paul Hasluck. French Polishing. Varnishing can be done by any person with little or no practice, and is suitable for common articles of furniture. But French polishing cannot be done successfully without considerable practice. Though when skillfully managed, it enhances the beauty of most woods. The beginner should not attempt to polish any article of value before he has gained experience by practicing upon unimportant articles. Although it may be said that each kind of timber requires different treatment, the general manipulation is very similar for all. The ingredients of the various polishing preparations are generally few and simple, and success does not necessarily lie in complication and multiplicity of mixtures. In the main, French polishing consists in coating the wood with a thin film of shellac, either pure or mixed with other gums and resins, and then getting on that film a gloss as brilliant and durable as possible. Generally, the wood has to be prepared and various minor details attended to before this can be done. For example, the pores of open-grained wood must be stopped, or, as the process is generally called, filled, to get a smooth surface and to prevent excessive absorption of the liquid polish. Then the appearance of some woods is improved and enriched by oiling them before applying the polish. This oiling, to a certain extent, darkens and mellows them, and brings up the figure. The temperature and atmosphere of the place in which French polishing is done are of considerable importance. Work cannot be done properly in a cold or damp room, as then the polish will get chilled, and, as it sets on the wood, become opaque and cloudy. To avoid this, the polisher should work in a warm room. The temperature for a living room, about 70 degrees, is about that suited for polishing. In warm summer weather, a fire is not necessary, but in winter it is. If the polisher notices that his polish chills, he must increase the heat of his room. If a moderate amount of warmth be brought near the surface as soon as any chill is observed, it will probably disappear. A small article may be taken to the fire, but with large work this course would hardly be convenient. In such cases, a good plan is to hold something warm a short distance from the chilled surface, but on no account must it touch, nor must the heat be great enough to scorch the polish. A common plan, but not altogether a good one, is to hold a piece of burning paper near the chill. An ordinary flat iron is very useful for small chilled patches. When the article is cold or damp, chill is more likely to occur. It is, therefore, always necessary to make sure after a stain has been used that the wood has become thoroughly dry. Not less important is the employment of suitable materials, both in the polish and in the tools of the polisher's art. These latter consist almost entirely of wadding or cotton wool and soft linen or cotton rags, from which the rubbers to apply the polish are made, and a few bottles are wadded to hold the various polishes, stains, and their components. The pad with which French polish is applied is called the rubber. Without it, the French polisher can do little in actual polishing, although he may not require it in the preliminary operations of oiling and staining. However simple in itself the rubber may be, it should be properly and carefully made of suitable materials. Otherwise, good work cannot be done with it. Those who have seen polishers at work may be inclined to infer that no great care is necessary, for a dirty rag, covering an equally uninviting lump of wadding, is usually seen. Examination will show the rubber to be more carefully made than might have been expected, and the expert polisher would probably prefer it to a nice, clean-looking rubber, such as a novice would choose. Nevertheless, A dirty rubber is not wanted, for dirt is fatal to first-class work. Hence the polisher should keep his rubbers scrupulously clean. They will naturally get stained and discolored with the polish, but that is a very different matter from being dirty. Old rubbers are preferable to new ones, provided they have been properly taken care of and not allowed to get hard. For flat surfaces or fretwork, a wad may be prepared by using a strip of torn woolen cloth from 1 inch to 2 inches wide. Cloth with a cut edge is not recommended for this purpose, as it is too harsh. Roll the strip very tightly into a wad about 1 inch, 2 inches, or 3 inches diameter, according to the size of the work, and tie tightly round with fine twine. Figure 1. This will give as nearly as possible the rubber resembling Figure 2. This wad is put into a double thickness of linen cloth, and the ends are gathered up like the ends of a pudding cloth. They are not tied, but are grasped as a handpiece while being used. This form of rubber would, however, be useless for bodying up moldings, beads, quirks, molded handrails, newel posts, etc., and when polishing large mahogany doors or other framed furniture, it would be impossible to get well into the corners of sunk panels, as in Figure 3. A well-shaped, soft, pliable rubber, with its rag covering free from creases, is to a practical French polisher equivalent to a sharp, finely set smoothing plane in the hands of a cabinet maker. The form in general use is shown in Figure 4. With such a rubber made of wadding, one is enabled to get into corners, round-turned work, and up to the edges of moldings in a manner impossible with a hard, round rubber. To make it, take a sheet of wadding, this is 9 inches wide, and tear off a piece 6 inches long. This will form a conveniently sized rubber, suitable for most work, but for small work, use one of smaller size. Double the wadding, making it 6 inches by 4½ inches. Squeeze this in the hand, keeping the skin unbroken, till in shape it nearly resembles half a pear. The illustrations, Figures 4, 5, and 6, show what is meant and the method of holding it. The rubber should then be charged with polish, and covered with a piece of clean, soft rag. In folding the rag, twist it on the upper side of the rubber. Each additional twist will bring it to a sharper point and cause the polish to ooze through its surface. It is not necessary to put a rag covering on the rubbers first used. The rubber must be kept free from creases. Otherwise, it will cause the surface to which it is applied to be stringy or full of ridges. Though rags have been mentioned as suitable for the outer covering or casing of the pad, some care in their selection is necessary. A piece with a seam across it would never do for a rubber, and anything which would tend to scratch the film of polish as it is being laid or worked on in the final operation of spiriting off must be carefully avoided. They may be either cotton or linen, and ought to be perfectly soft and fine, or at any rate free from knots or lumps. Some polishers advise the exclusive use of linen, but this is a needless restriction. It may be mentioned that new material may be used as well as rags. To render this suitable, all traces of the sizing and stiffening with which it may have been finished must be removed by a thorough washing. Any material to be used for polishing rubber must be thoroughly well dried. Indeed, the necessity of avoiding damp cannot be too much insisted on. With regard to the substance of the rubber, white wadding is the best to use, and this is readily obtainable from any upholsterer or chemist. It may be pure, if got from the latter, but it is certainly much dearer than any reasonable upholsterer would charge for something equally suitable. Wadding bought from an upholsterer has a thin skin on one or both sides, according to whether it has been split or not. The skin must be removed, leaving nothing but the soft cotton. For a few pence, enough ought to be obtainable to last a considerable time. It may be useful to know that, if it is clean, the raw material used in cotton manufacturing districts will do as well as the finest wadding. Cotton flock, used by upholsterers as a stuffing for mattresses, chairs, etc., is not suitable for polishing, except perhaps for the coarsest work. Even for this, it should not be used if anything better is available. Rubbers composed entirely of flannel are occasionally recommended for special kinds of work. It is doubtful if there is any advantage in using flannel, except for large flat surfaces, which can be got over more quickly with a large rubber than with a small one. The novice is advised to use the wadding rubber and to become an expert polisher with it before experimenting with anything else. The size of the rubber will, to some extent, depend on the nature of the work, but that above given may be regarded as generally suitable. A very large rubber is not advisable at first, and the polisher, as he gains experience, must be guided by circumstances. In handling, moreover, the polisher will be equally guided. A rubber of moderate dimensions is usually held by the tips of the thumb and fingers, but the polisher will probably find a large rubber can be more conveniently used by holding it in the palm of the hand. The rubber must be charged with polish for use, and some care will have to be exercised in doing this. The covering of the rubber is opened so that a little polish can be dropped on the wadding. A convenient way of doing this is to have the polish in a bottle, the cork of which has a channel or notch cut in it to allow only a few drops to escape at a time. Some polishers dip a portion of the rubber into the polish, but the other method is more generally adopted. It must not be saturated. Only enough polish to moisten the wadding must be used, or what will appear through the rag covering when pressed. The rubber having been thus charged, gather up the edges of rag as before directed. Then, to distribute the polish equally, press the rubber moderately firmly into the palm of the other hand. The rubber ought now to be ready for application to the wood, which may be assumed to have been properly prepared to receive its first coating of polish. At this stage, the principal thing is to get a good body of polish evenly spread on the wood. How this may best be done depends on circumstances, but if the desired result is obtained, the precise method is of secondary consequence. Let it be assumed that the work to be done is a small, flat surface. With moderate pressure on the rubber, quickly wipe over the entire surface, first with the grain of the wood, then across it. Then, without delay, go over it more minutely, the motion generally adopted for the rubber being shown in the illustration on page 38, figure 7. At first, the pressure should be gentle, but it should be increased as the polish gets worked in and the rubber drier, though at no time must the rubbing decline to scrubbing. While the rubber is in contact with the wood, it must be kept constantly in motion. An important point is not to allow the rubber to remain stationary on the wood during temporary absence, or at the end of the day's work. As the rubber gets dry, it must be recharged with polish, but let the novice beware of using this in excess. Old rubbers are better than new, so when done with, they should be kept in an airtight receptacle, such as a tin canister or a biscuit box. When any job is finished, do not throw the rubber away under the impression that rubber once laid aside becomes useless. This occurs only when it is left exposed to the air, because the spirit evaporates, leaving the shellac to harden. If laid aside for a length of time, the rubbers will become hard, even when kept in a box, unless it be perfectly airtight, which it probably will not be. A few drops of spirit put into the box now and then will, however, keep the contents in proper condition for use. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing by Paul Hasluck. Fillers for wood and filling in. Fillers are used by French polishers for much the same reason that size is used before varnishing, namely, to prevent immoderate absorption of the polish by the wood. French polish, or even thicker polish, when applied to wood, sinks in, or is absorbed in places, instead of remaining on the surface in a uniform coat. Here and there it will be observed that the polish or varnish has given more gloss than elsewhere. Where the gloss is brightest, the varnish has sunk least. The grain may be filled up by going over the wood with polish till the pores are closed, and some beginners may want to know why anything else in the nature of a filler should be used. The reason is that comparatively valuable French polish need not be used when a cheaper material serves the purpose, the use of which also saves time. Woods that are open in the grain and porous especially need a filler, while fine close-grained woods do not, and may be polished without. Still, a suitable filler can do no harm to any kind of wood, however fine the grain may be, so there can be no disadvantage in going over it with one preparatory to polishing. Though it may be a slight waste of time, a preliminary rub over with polish suffices when working on a fine wood, such as olive, which is both close and hard. To attain the desired thin, glossy film of shellac, which shall not be liable to grow dull unreasonably soon, the woods ordinarily used in furniture, ash, oak, mahogany, walnut, etc., should have the grain filled, for they are all of comparatively open grain. Ash and oak, being especially coarse, are called by polishers hungry woods. Polishers usually give such woods one or more coats of spirit varnish as an aid to filling up the grain. Before commencing the process of filling in, thoroughly brush all dust out of the grain of the wood, for this is wood dust, glass from the glass paper, and dirt, all inimical to grain luster if mixed with the grain stopper. For filling a cheap class of work, many polishers content themselves with giving the work one or two coats of glue or patent size, heavily stained by the addition of some dry pigment. For mahogany finish, add Venetian red till it gives quite a red tinge. For walnut, add brown umber. For pine, add yellow ochre. Apply the size hot with a brush, and rub it in lightly with a piece of rag, finishing the way of the grain, and taking care in the case of turned or molded work to get the filler well in the recessed parts. Of course, work that has been sized will not need filling in. As many different kinds of fillers are used, and each has its advocates, it will be advisable to name the principal fillers used in the trade, and to make a few remarks about each, so that learners can experiment with them, and perhaps finally fix on that which may seem to suit best. All will be found reliable, for good work is turned out by polishers with any of them, and even an extremely prejudiced individual would hesitate to say that any one is really bad, though he uses only that which suits him best. Sometimes, owing to the price, he uses the easiest and quickest, irrespective of its quality. Wood fillers ready for use are made from most kinds of wood, and, as a rule, they require only thinning with a little turpentine. When it is desired to make a filler, instead of purchasing one ready-made, proceed as follows. Take a portion of either china clay or corn flour, add boiled linseed oil, and stir until the mixture is of the consistency of putty. Then add patent dryers and thin with turpentine. If the wood on which the filler is to be used is to be kept light in color, use raw oil and the lightest variety of dryer. Apply the filler with a pound brush, rubbing it well into the pores of the wood. Allow it to remain on for, say, half an hour, and then proceed to remove all of it from the surface. Rub off as much as possible with shavings or wood wool, and with a pick made with a piece of wood sharpened at the end, remove the superfluous filler from the carvings, moldings, and corners. Moldings having sharp edges or lines, such as sunken beads, are best treated with a short-haired brush, such as a housemaid's scrubbing brush. Remember that the object is to remove as much of the filler as possible, because if any be left on the surface, it will show up in dark spots when the work is finished. It will, of course, be understood that the filler must be properly tinted to produce the color required, and to accord with the stain. The pigments to be used for producing certain effects will be referred to in another chapter. The filler to be mentioned next is varnish, or extra thick polish, which is rubbed into the wood till the pores are full. This is a clean and natural filler, but it is a troublesome one, and the results are not better than those arrived by a cheaper and more expeditious method. Occasionally, it may be an advantage to use this, though for trade purposes and at trade prices on ordinary furniture, the polisher is out of pocket by employing it. This process of filling is rubbing in polish or thin varnish, and, when it is dry, smoothing down with fine glass paper. The application of polish and paper must alternate till the former no longer sinks, and this will depend on the nature of the wood and on the filler used. The process will be completed much sooner with a fine, close-grained hardwood than with a coarse, open-grained one, such as ash. Brown hard varnish and polish mixed form a fair preliminary application, but they do not tend to a good surface at the finish, so are suitable for common work only. The proportions are 2/3 polish and 1/3 varnish, brown or white hard. The mixture is put on carefully and quickly with a brush. It must not be brushed, but must be left alone until hard. Whiting and turpentine can be recommended for a good general filler. The filler is both clean and economical, does not raise the grain as when water is used, and contains no grease. It is, therefore, not open to the objections that are urged against other fillers, and in the hands of inexperienced polishers it is perhaps the most likely to ensure a successful result. An advantage it possesses over plaster of Paris and water is that it does not harden quickly. Some urge that it does not harden sufficiently, but this objection cannot be treated seriously. Use finely crushed whiting and mix to the consistency of thick paint, but still thin enough to be worked into the wood. Take up a little at a time on coarse rag or canvas, and rub well in crossways with the grain, the work having previously been wiped over with raw linseed oil. Apply equally all over the article to be polished. Wipe off clean, and set aside a few hours or overnight to enable the filling to set, though if necessary, polishing may be proceeded with at once. Direct filling with polish is modified by the use of fine pumice powder, which renders the process quicker and better. This method is more practiced in France than in this country. Here it is sometimes employed by the trade, but it has not been generally adopted. It requires some experience to use it with advantage, but apart from the time required, it is doubtful if a better means of filling the grain has been discovered, for it is both clean and free from greasiness. Polish is the basis of this filler, the pumice powder being useful in assisting to fill by getting into the pores of the wood, as well as in rubbing down inequalities of the polish. The powder is kept in a muslin bag, and lightly sprinkled on the wood, which is then gone over with an ordinary rubber fairly charged with polish. Only a small quantity of the pumice powder should be used at a time, or the work suffers. Instead of sprinkling the powder on the wood, some polishers prefer to put it on the sole of the rubber. Whatever method be adopted, the work will require papering down afterwards, but perhaps not to the same extent as when no pumice powder has been used. The object of pumice powder is twofold. First, as in coach painting, for leveling down purposes, and to bring up the luster of the varnish by giving a dead undersurface on which to apply it. Secondly, for use on spirit varnish or French polish surfaces for dulling purposes, thus giving what is known on antique furniture as eggshell finish, or that semi-lustrous finish largely practiced in the United States on American organs. A very much used filler is composed of Russian tallow, mixed with either plaster of Paris or whiting. The chief thing in its favor is that it is a quick process, and therefore allows of polishing being done at a comparatively small cost of labor. But tallow is not a nice material to work with. The tallow and plaster are made into a stiff paste and well rubbed into the wood, from which any excess must be wiped off. Any fillers that set hard must be wiped off while they are still soft. Apart from its unpleasantness in working, tallow is apt to increase the tendency of the polished wood to sweat, through the grease breaking down through the film of lac. Oil or grease, in connection with polish, can only be regarded as a necessary evil. There are fillers which do not contain grease, and it is just as well to use them, even if it be admitted that a tallow filler is not prejudicial to good work or to durability. Beyond wiping over with an oily rag to bring out the figure and tone of the wood, the less oil is used, the better for permanency of luster, as oil forms no part of polish in itself, being used only as a vehicle to work the gums easily. The true secret of laying a polish that shall bear future inspection lies in using the oil so that it shall always be on the top of the polish, not underneath, and the final point is to remove this oil in finishing. Since grease is objectionable, it may be asked whether water cannot be used instead to render the plaster or whiting soft and pasty. It often is, but the objection is that water is apt to raise the grain of the wood, which means making it rough, whilst the tallow does not raise the wood at all. The rough surface can be rubbed smooth with glass paper. Whiting or plaster of Paris and water can certainly be used as a filler, and this mixture is preferable to those in which tallow or grease is found. As tallow is unpleasant stuff, many polishers discard it in favor of raw linseed oil mixed with some polish. The use of this with whiting overcomes the objection to water, but this is not altogether a suitable filler for the novice. With too much oil, sweating is apt to occur sometime, while with too little oil in the mixture, the filling is apt to remain on the surface instead of being forced into the pores of the wood. It is not possible to give the proportions of oil and polish which shall be suitable to all occasions, so the polisher must use his own discretion, and he may as well leave this filler alone till he has acquired experience. But in experienced hands it is really a good one. A little plaster and polish, without the oil, make a good filler, but it must be rubbed in, and all the superfluous filler removed with fine glass paper before using pure polish. A good filler for oak and ash is water and methylated spirits and plaster of Paris. It should be prepared and used in the following manner. Crush the plaster of Paris into a fine powder, and place in a saucer or other open vessel. In another, put the spirits. Then take a piece of soft rag and soak in the spirits. Then dip in the plaster, rub hard into the wood, and clean off. Do not mix the plaster and spirits together in a paste, like the ordinary filling. A preliminary rub with polish before filling in will keep the grain smooth, and stop sweating to a great extent, as there would be a foundation of polish. It is advisable that white fillers should be tinted to correspond with the color of the wood on which they are used. The polisher will seldom have occasion to use in his fillers any colors other than the following: for mahogany, rose pink; for walnut, or any brown wood, such as stained oak, Van Dyke brown or umber; and for ebonized work, glass black is as good as any. Light woods, of course, may have any white filler applied, but it should be deemed advisable to tint it. There will be no difficulty in doing so, as an exact match is not necessary. In addition to these ordinary fillers, common to the British workshop, there are several patent and American fillers, but none of them has come into general use, nor seems likely to supersede the commoner varieties. A complaint against them is that they are more expensive, without having sufficient compensating advantages. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing by Paul Hasluck. Bodying in and spiriting off. The term bodying, applied to the polisher's art, means coating the wood with a thin, evenly distributed layer of the polish. The way in which this is done greatly affects the appearance and the durability of the gloss. When the body is too thin, the gloss subsequently given to it may at first be beautiful, but as the polish sinks or perishes, the gloss fades. When the body is too thick, the gloss may appear all right, but the work is apt to look treacly, as though varnish had been used. Besides, a thick body impairs the pure tone of some woods. The high degree of excellence to which polishing is capable of being brought is seen only on the best cabinet work. Polish on second-rate furniture is generally in keeping with the inferior quality of the woodwork. The cheap, gaudy furniture, which is often seen in shops, must not be taken as models of polishing. The price paid for polishing is reduced, with the result that inferior polish is used and less time is spent on the work. Although the best materials and the expenditure of time and labor will not ensure good work by unpracticed hands, they are important factors, and it will be wise to use materials of good quality. To make a good average polish, neither too thick nor too thin, about 6 ounces of shellac to each pint of methylated spirit will be required, but great exactitude in the proportions is not necessary. The proportions may vary according to the fancy of the polisher, and to some extent according to the nature of the work he is engaged on. If the polish turns out too thick, it can be thinned by adding more spirit. If too thin, the deficiency can be made up by adding more shellac. A rough and ready way of measuring the proportions is to half fill a bottle with roughly broken shellac and then fill up with ordinary methylated spirit. The shellac dissolves gradually, and the process is hastened by an occasional shaking or stirring with a stick. Heat is not necessary. Indeed, the preparation of polish by heat is dangerous. Two kinds of polish are used. One, known as white polish, is nearly colorless. The other is known as brown polish, or simply polish. The latter is always understood, if unqualified, by the word white. White polish is made with white or bleached shellac, the other with ordinary orange or reddish-brown shellac. Either polish may be used on any kind of wood, except where great purity of tint is required. The white is to be preferred for all light woods, such as light oak, ash, sycamore, satin, etc., while the brown may be used on darker. But even on these, white polish is good, with the exception of mahogany, the only ordinary furniture wood for which a decided preference might be given to brown polish. Under ordinary circumstances, however, either polish may be used indiscriminately. The point as to brown or white polish for dark wood belongs to the higher branches of the polisher's art. It will be seen that white polish is the more generally useful of the two, so those who do not care to keep both kinds may confine themselves to it. Through the slightly higher price of the bleached shellac, it costs a little more, but the extra cost is so small that it is hardly worth considering by those who use small quantities. Those who use polish in large quantities can have both kinds. Polish bought ready-made may be equal to that made at home from the recipe given, for there is nothing to prevent manufacturers using the same ingredients, and many of them do. Still, from the impossibility of knowing the ingredients in ready-made polish, there is some risk attending its use. From the price at which some polish is sold, it is fair to suppose something cheaper than spirit or shellac has been used, and though good polish may be bought, it is better for the user to prepare his own, which can be depended on. Bought polish may be thoroughly good in every way, brilliant, clear, and durable, but those who are best able to judge generally prefer to make their own polish to do the best class of work. Prejudice may account for this preference. Manufacturers of polish assert that, in addition to shellac, certain gums or resins improve the quality of the polish when used with knowledge and discretion. For instance, one gum may give increased elasticity, while another may harden the film. But for a good all-round polish, which can be relied on, many polishers assert that there is nothing to surpass a simple solution of shellac and methylated spirit. A few approved formulae for polishes are given at the end of this book, so that those who feel inclined to do so may experiment for themselves. Shellac is the principal ingredient in nearly all. Those persons who cannot polish with shellac and spirit alone will not be able to do any better with the more complicated mixtures. Therefore, no one should remain under the impression that he will do better if he works with another kind of polish. Enough having now been said about the material, we may proceed to the using of it for bodying. In the first place, the wood must be prepared by filling of one kind or another, as fully explained in Chapter 4, and rubbed down smoothly with fine or worn glass paper, in order to make it fit to receive the polish, for a high degree of finish cannot be got on a rough surface. The rubber, which consists of cotton wadding with a soft rag cover with which the polish is applied, has been sufficiently treated in Chapter 3, so that nothing more need be said about it. Work, rubber, polish, and a little raw linseed oil being ready, bodying in may be proceeded with in the following way. Moisten the wadding with polish, put the rag cover on carefully, so that it is without folds or wrinkles. Dab the rubber into the palm of the left hand to distribute the polish evenly, and cause it to moisten the rag at the bottom properly. Supposing the work is a panel or flat surface, the following will be found a good method of treating it, and it is one that is followed more or less closely by experienced polishers. Rub briskly across the grain to get the surface covered with polish. Then, by a series of circular movements, as shown by the lines in Figure 7, go over the whole of the work. A moderate pressure should be applied, which should be increased gradually as the rubber dries, but the movement should at no time degenerate into mere scrubbing. In order that the rubber may work smoothly without sticking, a little of the raw linseed oil should be applied. The less of this used the better, and if it can be dispensed with altogether, no harm will be done. To make the rubber work smoothly, a very little will suffice. The tip of a finger, moistened with oil, and touched on the face of the rubber is all that is required. The rubber must not be dipped in the oil, nor must the oil be dropped on it from a bottle, for by these means more oil would be applied than is necessary, and this would prove fatal to good work. The only recognized oil used in French polishing is raw linseed. This may be worked over the natural woods in the first place, to give them that peculiar tone that cannot be gained by other means. Otherwise, the less oil used, the better for the durability of the work. Bear in mind that it forms no part of polish in itself, being used only to enable us to work the gums easily. Thus, without its aid, the polished rubber would be apt to stick or drag, thus breaking up the surface instead of leveling it. On any surface in which spirit varnish forms a part, this will be particularly noticeable, and in any case, it is next to impossible to get that beautiful level surface gained by spiriting out unless a little oil is used. As the rubber dries, more polish must be applied to it, as was done in the first instance, with more oil as required. A small quantity of polish goes a long way, and the novice must carefully avoid making the rubber wet. It should be no more than fairly moist. Many a beginner, noticing how tedious the work is with a dry rubber, may think that if he used more polish, the desired result would be more quickly attained. If the object were merely to get the wood coated, this might be the case, but the result of using too much polish would be that the shellac left by the quick evaporation of the spirit would be ridgy and irregular, instead of in a fine, even coating or body. Anything approaching a flow of polish from the rubber must be avoided. When the rubber is not sufficiently charged with polish, the labor of bodying up will be unduly protracted, or may be rendered impossible if no polish can be rubbed on to the wood. The first bodying in process should be continued till it seems that the wood absorbs no more of the polish. There will be a perceptible gloss on its surface, but it will be streaky, and the rubber marks will show very distinctly. All these marks will be removed later on. It may be thought that if the polish is too thick or too thin, the result will be very much the same as if the rubber was too wet or too dry. The principal objection to having the polish too thin is that it will take more time in working a good body on the wood. It will, however, be better to risk this rather than to have the polish too thick. An experienced polisher would soon detect fault in either direction by the way in which the polish works, but the novice must be on the lookout for irregularities in the shape of lumps or ridges, and, with a little attention, he will have no difficulty in avoiding serious mishaps. Let the work stand for at least a day, carefully covered up from dust. On examining it, the body will be found to have altered in appearance to an extent which will depend on how much the polish has sunk into the wood. The work must be again bodied up as before, always remembering to use as little oil as possible. Then it will again be laid aside, and the bodying process repeated till the polish no longer seems to sink in, even after the work has lain aside for a few days. When this stage is reached, the bodying may be considered complete, and the work ready for the first polishing operations. Before proceeding to consider these, however, the novice will do well to note the following hints. The number of times the work will require to be bodied depends on circumstances. Fine, close-grained woods will not require so many as the more open kinds, such as oak, ash, mahogany, etc. But for the best work, which is intended to be as durable as can be, it need rarely exceed 4. An interval of 1 or more days may elapse between the successive bodies, the chief object of waiting being to let them sink in as much as they will. If, after the work has been laid aside for a few days, the polish has not sunk at all, no advantage would be gained by giving it another body. It is very seldom that the first body is enough, but often only one body is applied, where either low price or limited time will not allow of more, so those who wish to do polishing need not think the process cannot be hurried. Still, imperfect bodying is not advisable. Such work will soon want touching up. When work is made merely to sell, one body, and that of the slightest, is sufficient. From the seller's point of view, if not from the buyers. Between the bodyings, especially after the first and second, the surface of the work should be rubbed down with fine glass paper, not to rub the body off, but just enough to smooth the surface. It may be here remarked that pumice powder, used in moderation, is useful for working down inequalities of surface. Glass papering has been recommended as necessary after the first and second bodies, but the process may be done after any others, though it should not be required if the work has been skillfully done. In fact, the final bodying up may be regarded almost as the beginning of the spiriting off. Before beginning to work a fresh body on a previous one, it is as well to wash the surface gently with lukewarm water, not using too much of it, in order to remove the grease and allow the rubber to work freely. The water must be thoroughly dried up before applying the rubber. In moderation, the washing can never do harm, and is generally an advantage, though not absolutely necessary. When a long interval has elapsed, the washing should never be omitted, as dust will settle on the work, and it need scarcely be said that dust should not be rubbed into the polish. When bodying up, polishers should see that their hands are clean and free from old polish, which is so often seen on them. If they are soiled with old polish or shellac, bits are apt to flake off and destroy the surface of new work. This may be an appropriate place to say that any polish which sticks to the hands may be washed away with hot water and soda, or with methylated spirit. The body should be thin, as it is not so much the quantity of body on the wood as its quality that is important. It is also essential that it should be applied with sufficient intervals between the successive bodies to allow a sinkage. Another important matter is to dry the rubbers well by working them on each body till dry, and not to moisten them frequently. By this means, the film of shellac is kept thin. Neither a wet nor dry rubber should, on any account, be allowed to stand on a surface being polished. The rubber must be kept moving, and should glide gradually onto the work, not be dabbed down on it. In the initial stages of bodying, care in this respect is not so important as later on, when it is absolutely necessary. The same precaution should be used when lifting the rubber from the work. For the guidance of beginners, it may be stated that if they take care of the edges of the work, the rest of the surface will look after itself. The reason is that the edges are apt to be somewhat neglected, and the polish to be less there than elsewhere. The secret of a good, durable polish depends primarily on a good body, and this, in turn, on sufficient time having been allowed for sinkage. The final operation in finish polishing, by which the gloss is put on the body previously applied, is known as spiriting off. In this operation, rubber marks and smears of all kinds are removed, and the beautiful surface known as French polish is the result. Bodying is important so far as durability is concerned, but spiriting is more so with regard to finish. If the worker fails in spiriting, his previous efforts will, to a good extent, have been in vain. Disregarding staining, darkening, and other processes with which a good polisher should be acquainted, the spiriting is perhaps the most severe test of skill in the whole process of polishing, and a man who can manage this part of the work really well may be considered a competent polisher. The first operation to be described in the process of spiriting off partakes very much of the nature of bodying in. At the beginning of it is bodying, and at the end spiriting. The two processes merge one into the other. There is no abrupt break as between filling and bodying, except for the intermediate stage, although the processes are well defined both in character and purpose. This intermediate stage is not always practiced, but it is recommended when good work is wanted. Briefly, spiriting off consists in washing the bodied surface with methylated spirit. This being understood, the final bodying up, or first spiriting off, whichever this process may be called, consists in gradually reducing the quantity of polish in the rubber and supplying its place with spirit. The polish is gradually reduced by the addition of spirit till all the polish has been worked out of the rubber. The rubber may be charged, first with 3 parts polish and 1 part spirit. Next time, equal quantities. The third time, 3 parts spirit and 1 part polish. And the fourth charging will be with spirit only. It does not follow that these proportions need be strictly observed, nor are they so in practice, but this example illustrates the process. The last rubber will be almost free from polish, and it should be worked till it is dry or nearly so. At this stage, spiriting proper may begin, and a fresh rubber should be used. It need not be a new one, but it should be one which has been used only for spiriting, and which has no polish on it. It will be better if it has 3 or 4 coverings of rag on its face, which can be removed as they dry. If only one cover is used, the spirit is apt to evaporate too quickly. The spirit in the rubber has a tendency to partially dissolve the shellac or body on the wood. This it does to a very limited extent, unless the rubber is made too wet, when there is danger of not only spiriting and smoothing the surface, but of actually washing away the body. This mishap must be carefully guarded against. There should be enough spirit to allow the surface of the body to be softened and smoothed, but no more, and the rubbing should be uniform, and not more in one place than in another. There is hardly any likelihood of the novice erring by using too little spirit, so he may be reminded that the less of it there is in the rubber at a time, the better. The rubbing should be gentle at first, becoming harder as the spirit dries off, and oil must not be used on the rubber face, for when there is oil on either the rubber or on the work, the polish cannot be brought up. The chief cause of failure lies in getting the spirit rubber too wet, and so softening and tearing up the gums. Many meet with success by dispensing with it, using instead a swab of clean, soft rag, fairly damp, not wet, with methylated spirit. If the spiriting off process is being done correctly, the gloss will soon begin to appear, and when it seems approaching a finished condition, the rubber ought to be moved only in the direction of the grain, and not across it, nor with circular motion. The final touches should be given with the soft rubber rag alone, care being taken not to scratch the surface, which is now softened by the action of the spirit. The surface will gradually harden, but for a time it should be handled with care, and nothing be allowed to come in contact with it, or it is very likely to be marked. It should also be protected from dust, for any settling on it may be retained by the polish, the luster of which would certainly suffer. Cabinet makers, and perhaps dealers in furniture, who do not keep an experienced polisher, or who may not be able to get their work done out, may be reminded that, circumstances permitting, polished furniture should be wiped over with the spirit rubber an hour or two before it is sent home, to freshen it up. If the surface is at all soft, neither packing mats nor anything else likely to injure it should be allowed to come in contact with it. The polishing on many things sent long journeys is often greatly disfigured from mat and other markings, but they are easily touched up on arrival at their destination. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Wood Finishing, comprising staining, varnishing, and polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, comprising staining, varnishing, and polishing, by Paul Hasluck. Glazing and wax finishing. Glazing, though an imitation, has a recognized acceptance among polishers. It is remarkably convenient occasionally, and in some cases possesses an advantage over spiriting, so that it may be fairly classed among the ordinary processes of polishing. When done in moderation, glazing is as useful on furniture carving as the application of spirit varnish. Such work is commonly said, and justly, to be French polished. The real objection to glaze finish is that, though at first the appearance is equal, it is not so durable as the other. Glaze may be said to be even superior to badly spirited finish, and here is the chief claim it has for notice. It is seldom that a casual polisher can manage to do spiriting thoroughly, for the reason that he has not sufficient opportunity of acquiring practice. Nevertheless, finishing by means of glaze is not so good as the method by spiriting, when the latter is well done, and should be considered as a means of getting the same effect easily and quickly, in imitation, in fact, of the real thing. The difference between the spirit and glaze finishes is that, in the one case, the effect is produced by friction, in the other by the addition of a thin, fine varnish to the surface of the body of polish. In the former case, the polish itself is polished. In the latter, it is varnished with a mixture commonly known as glaze, but to which other names are sometimes given. Among polishers who command a fair price for their work, glaze is of comparatively limited application, and is confined to those parts where the spirit rubber cannot be conveniently used, or where its use is not necessary. Instances of such may be found in chair rails and various parts of the frame. These are usually polished, more or less, before the chair is upholstered, or, at any rate, before the outer covering is put on, the finishing being almost necessarily done last of all. The less the chair is handled by the polisher, the better, especially if the covering is a delicate one, for there is less risk of injury with 1 or 2 wipes over the glazed rubber than with the more prolonged spiriting. Glaze may be used with advantage in inlaid work, where the inlay is slightly, though perhaps not intentionally, higher than the surrounding wood. In such a case, it is better to resort to glaze than to finish with a spirit rubber. On fretwork also, glaze may often be used with advantage, and, generally, it is unobjectionable on parts which are not subject to wear and tear. It will stand a moderate amount of handling, but not so much as good, hard, spirited-off polish, and the luster is not so durable. Glaze, under one or other of its different names, may be bought ready-made, but for reasons similar to those given in connection with French polish, the homemade article is to be recommended. The preparation of glaze is simple, the ingredients being gum benzoin and methylated spirit. After the benzoin is dissolved, the solution should be strained through muslin to free it from foreign matter. The proportions may vary, but those given for polish do very well, and with the substitution of crushed benzoin for shellac, the process of making is exactly the same. Gum benzoin differs greatly in quality, but the best should be used by the polisher. Compared with lac, it is expensive, so that the saving which is attributed to its use is mainly in time, which is money, at least from a trade point of view. Cheap benzoin is not to be relied on, and in a strange place an experienced polisher would look with suspicion on any offered at a very low price, however satisfactory its appearance. Where material is liable to adulteration, the best way to avoid imposition is to go to a reliable dealer and to pay a fair price. Glaze, as used by French polishers, can be bought ready-made at most drysaltery stores, as patent glaze, at from 8s. to 16s. per gallon. According to quality and age, it improves with age. To make the genuine article, dissolve 6 or 8 ounces of best gum benzoin, costing 2s. 6d. per pound, in 1 pint of methylated spirit. Keep it in a closely stoppered bottle, otherwise the spirit will evaporate quickly. Glaze may be applied with either rubber, sponge, or brush. In most cases, the rubber is the most suitable and is most commonly used. It is made in the ordinary way as used for polish, described on pages 21 through 25, but it must not be applied with pressure. The glaze is painted on rather than rubbed into the work, which must have been previously bodied in. There seems to be an idea that glaze, or something put on bare wood, will cause a gloss right off, but nothing will do this. A polish can only be got on wood by varnish, or by bodying in and polish. When using glaze, the rubber should be made wetter than for polish or spirit, but still there should not be sufficient to drip from it. You should glaze or wet the wood when the rubber is very lightly pressed on it. 1 or 2 wipes in the direction of the grain of the wood, with a somewhat quick motion, will put the glaze on. Always let the glaze dry before applying the rubber again to the same place. The coats may be repeated till the gloss is satisfactory, but the film of glaze should never be made a thick one. If preferred, a sponge may be used exactly as a rubber would be, but it is questionable if there is any advantage gained. It is rather a matter of fancy. When a brush is used, the glaze may be applied as a varnish, pure and simple. With a brush, a mixture of glaze and French polish, either white or brown, according to the work, in equal quantities, may be used with advantage. Glaze that is not so satisfactory in appearance as it should be may sometimes be improved by passing a spirit rubber lightly over it, though this should be done with great caution to avoid washing it off. When carefully and skillfully done, there can be little doubt that a glazed surface may be often, if not always, improved by slightly spiriting it. To glaze a wide surface, see that it is free from dull streaks and ridges and oil, and the rubber soft and free from fluff. Apply the glaze as evenly as possible, going over the surface several times until the rubber is nearly dry. Then, with the smallest quantity of oil and a little spirits, go over the glaze very lightly at first, varying the direction of the rubber to avoid ridges. A dull, even surface may be obtained by adding 1/3 to 1/2 of sandirect to the solution of benzoin and using the rubber only damp, not saturated. Old French polish work may often be revived by being lightly gone over with glaze after the surface has been washed and cleaned with warm water. This treatment is often considerably better than that commonly adopted with furniture paste, polishes, creams, and revivers of various kinds. Although the beauty of most furniture woods is enhanced to the highest degree by French polishing when well done, there are other processes which, though not capable of being brought to such perfection, are much simpler. Among these is wax polishing. This mode of finishing is remarkably easy, both as regards materials and manipulation, and the unskilled novice can manage to wax polish almost as well as an expert. It is, therefore, a suitable process for the beginner. Though any wood may be treated by waxing, it is generally confined to oak, especially after this has been darkened by fumigation with ammonia, which process is explained on page 12. The appearance of oak so finished is comparatively dull, but it has an attractiveness which French polish does not possess for all eyes. For antique oak furniture, whether genuine or imitation, wax is the best finish, though varnish is often used. Wax polish, though it may not give the same amount of gloss, is clearer and finer. Varnish clogs the wood and is apt to give a treacly look to any piece of furniture finished with it. Mahogany may very appropriately be finished by wax polish, and for many purposes it may be superior to the dulled French polish so often seen. The top of a dining table is apt to be rendered unsightly from hot plates or dishes, injuring the polished surfaces. The heat burns or blisters the hardened shellac of the French polish, and a finish which is not so liable to disfigurement is preferable. This is found in wax polish. Usually, dining table tops, unless French polished, are simply oil polished. Waxing is, however, less tedious, and at least as suitable for the purpose, and the readiness with which an accidental marking can be obliterated renders it particularly useful. Wood stained black, to produce so-called ebony, may be waxed polished. The result is certainly a closer approximation to the appearance of real ebony than when the work is French polished in the usual way. By polishing fretwork articles with wax, they may easily be made to look better than many of them do when unskillfully French polished. Though it has been said that any wood may be waxed polished, there can be no question that this process answers best on the more coarsely grained woods, such as oak and ash. For pine and other light woods of close texture it is not so well suited, unless they have been previously stained. The ingredients for wax polish are, in the simplest mixture, beeswax and turpentine. Resin and Venice turpentine are occasionally added. Resin is added with the intention of hardening the surface, but, provided the wax be of good quality, these additions are quite unnecessary, if not injurious, and a good result should be got from wax and turps. Wax and turpentine alone are all the materials necessary to make a good wax polish, and when anything else enters into the composition, the mixture is one of a fancy character. It is not proposed to discuss the qualities of beeswax offered for sale, and the polisher must decide what kind he gets. Some advocate the use of fine white wax, and possibly a better finish may sometimes be got with it than with ordinary yellow wax, which, however, is the kind generally used. The only occasions when it might not be so good as the white are when extreme purity of tone is required for a light wood. Wood perfectly white is, however, seldom wax polished. The way in which wax polish is prepared depends a good deal on the proportions of the materials. For liquid polish, shred the wax finely, and pour the turpentine over it, leaving the two till they are incorporated. Cold turpentine will dissolve wax slowly, but a more expeditious method is to melt the wax by heat, and before it has time to solidify, pour the turpentine into it. Caution is necessary when melting wax, and on no account should the turpentine be poured into the wax while it is still on the fire. With ordinary care there is no danger, and the possibility of a mishap is suggested merely for the benefit of those who might otherwise overlook the inflammable character of turpentine vapor. Should the mixture be either too thick or too thin, there will be no trouble in altering its consistency afterwards. To thin a mass which is too stiff, a very moderate warming by placing the bottle in hot water will reduce it to a more liquid form, as the turpentine already in it facilitates the change, and more turpentine is added. To stiffen the mixture, wax should be melted separately, and the original mixture added to it. The heat of the freshly melted wax will probably be sufficient to cause all the materials to mix. In any case, the wax should be thoroughly melted before the turpentine is added, as a lumpy mixture is neither pleasant to work with nor conducive to good finish. The natural tendency of a wax polishing mixture exposed to the air is to stiffen, on account of the evaporation of the turpentine. A considerable time must elapse before there is an appreciable alteration, and the fact that a change does go on slowly is mentioned to remind polishers that if they have a considerable quantity of the mixture standing over, they must not expect it to retain its original consistency unless kept in a closed vessel, such as a tightly corked bottle. A hint for those who think that the more ingredients a mixture contains, the better it must be, and who are not satisfied unless there is a certain amount of resin in their wax polishing paste. Always melt the resin first, and add the wax gradually, and constantly stir. Whether resin be used or not, the mixture should be allowed to get quite cold before it is applied to the work. Although the consistency of wax polish varies considerably, the comparative merits of different degrees of stiffness or fluidity must be considered, so that an intelligent conception of the polisher's aim may be arrived at. Suppose a piece of beeswax, without any admixture of turpentine, is rubbed on a piece of smooth, flat wood. Some of the wax adheres to the surface, which, when friction is applied, becomes glossy or polished. The labor, however, is considerable, and, though dry wax may do on a flat surface, when moldings or carvings are to be treated, the difficulties in the way of satisfactory application are considerable. The remedy is to soften the wax, so that it may be got into all parts of the work. Melted wax might do, but in putting it onto the wood it becomes cold, and consequently reverts to its original stiffness. We have then to get the wax to a fair working consistency by means of some suitable solvent, which turpentine has proved to be. It is cleanly, inexpensive, and evaporates sufficiently quickly, besides mixing well with the wax. Some polishers prefer what others might think in excess of turpentine. When a stiff paste is used, the wax is apt to be deposited in excessive quantity, necessitating a considerable amount of rubbing in places to remove it. A fluid polish spreads the wax much more evenly, but no gloss can be obtained till the turpentine has disappeared, either evaporated or been absorbed by the wood. When the polish has been laid evenly over the work, this does not take long, so a thin mixture may be considered preferable to a very stiff one. A paste of about the consistency of butter in hot weather might be regarded as a medium. Those who use a wax polish which could be poured would consider this stiff, while others, who add very little turpentine, or who believe in resin, would consider it thin. A thick mixture or a thin one may be used, the result depending more on the manipulation of the material than on the material itself, and this manipulation may next be considered. In the application of wax polish, there is almost as great a variety in practice as in proportion of ingredients. The great thing is to have the wax, the turpentine is merely the vehicle for conveying this, evenly and thinly distributed, and so long as this is done, it is of small consequence how it is managed. To spread the wax with, some use a piece of rag, while others prefer a stiff brush specially made for the purpose, and both get equally good results. After the wax has been spread, the polish is obtained by friction, and the more you rub, the brighter the polish will be. The brush or cloth used to rub the wax into the wood should not be employed to give the finishing touches. In this final friction, it is essential that the cloth or brush be used perfectly dry, as if it is at all damp, no polished surface can be produced. The final polish is best done with a perfectly clean rubber, and 3 sets of cloths or rubbers may be used. With the first, the mixture is to be rubbed on the wood. With the second, it is to be rubbed off till a fair amount of polish is got, while with the third, the rubbing should be continued till the surface is as bright as it can be got. The directions which have been given should enable anyone to wax polish wood successfully. Hard, dry rubbing with energetic application is at least as important as the wax and turpentine, for though more simple than the French polishing process, it is more laborious. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing by Paul Hasluck. Oil polishing and dry shining. The simple process of oil polishing must now receive attention, and there is still something to admire in a comparatively dull oiled surface. The process simply consists of rubbing in linseed oil and polishing with a soft rag. The oiling and polishing must be continued at intervals till the requisite shine is obtained. To get the best results takes time and friction. Oil polishing is not difficult, but it is decidedly fatiguing and tedious. The more the surface is rubbed, the better, and the process may be extended over some weeks. Patience and energetic application are still more essential than with wax polishing, for to get even the semblance of a polish or gloss within a week or two with the aid of oil must not be expected. How long does it take to finish a thing properly with oil? It may be said the work is never finished. An oiled surface will always bear more rubbing than it has had, and will not be deteriorated by friction. Still, from 1 to 2 months should suffice to get a good polish which will be durable according to the amount of labor bestowed upon it during that time. This is more time than can be devoted to the finishing touches of a piece of furniture generally nowadays, so it may almost be considered that oil polishing is an obsolete process. Still, it does not follow that because the process is too long to be remunerative in ordinary work, it should not be worthy of attention, especially as it has merits which recommend it where speed is not a primary consideration. One great advantage of it is that it is much more durable than either French polish or wax polishes. It does not blister by heat like the former, nor spoil with water to such an extent as the latter, with which, in general appearance, it may be compared. It is because it does not blister by heat that it is especially useful. An ordinary French polished dining table top shows the damage caused by hot dishes laid on it, unless great care has been taken. On an oil polished dining table top, the same hot dishes may be placed almost with impunity, and it is chiefly dining table tops that have prevented oil polishing becoming quite extinct. Though the whole of a table, or anything else, may be polished with oil, it is usual, even when the top is oiled, to polish the legs and frame otherwise. Linseed oil is the only material used in pure oil polishing, but other ingredients have been used, till it is difficult to recognize the distinction between oil polishing and French polishing. The two processes may overlap to an almost indefinite extent. With these we have, at present at any rate, nothing to do, and to discuss them might only tend to confuse the novice. Authorities differ on the state in which the linseed oil should be used, some recommending boiled, others raw, and others various proportions of the two. For ordinary work, boiled linseed oil is perhaps the better, but this is not intended to imply that those who prefer raw oil are wrong. Therefore, any oil polisher who has an inclination to some fancy mixture of boiled and raw oils can use it. The treatment is very much the same as in wax polishing. It consists in rubbing the oil well into the wood, not saturating or flooding, but scrubbing it, and then rubbing long and hard. The process may be repeated almost indefinitely, daily or at longer intervals, till a polish which is deemed sufficient appears. For example, take a tabletop, rub some oil well into it, and then polish with a rubber formed by wrapping some baize, felt, or similar material round a brick or other suitable block, the purpose of which is, by its weight, to some extent to relieve the polisher from using his muscles in applying pressure. The rubbing should be continued till the surface of the wood is dry. The only perceptible difference in the top will be the darkened appearance caused by the oil, as little or no gloss will appear at first. By repeating the operation, however, a polish will come up gradually, and a surface, which in the opinion of many is superior to that of French polish, will be the ultimate result. Should the polish sweat, some methylated spirit may be rubbed in. This will dry the surface without spoiling the polish. Oil polishing is hardly suitable for anything but plain work, on account of the labor required, but any piece of work can be so polished if the necessary time and labor be given to it. Even when it is not deemed practicable to bring up a polish with oil, a very pleasing finish may be given to a piece of work by merely rubbing it with oil. The color is enriched to an extent which perhaps would hardly be credited by those who have not had frequent opportunities of seeing wood in the white, and again after being oiled. In choice mahogany especially, the improvement is very marked. Light oak is also greatly improved in tone. Fret workers who are not proficient in French polishing would be more satisfied with the appearance of anything they make if they simply oiled it instead of coating it with shellac, which has to serve for French polish. Dry shining will be found a simple process after the ordinary methods of French polishing have been mastered. Finishing work by dry shining is the crudest and simplest way in which a gloss can be got on the surface of wood by means of a thin varnish of shellac and methylated spirit. It must not be mistaken for varnishing, as this process is ordinarily understood, for it is distinctly a process of French polishing. Even those who have managed to do bodying up and spiriting off, or even glazing, will find the operation of dry shining simple in comparison. It is the nearest approach to varnishing by means of a rubber instead of a brush that polishers practice. The wood is varnished with ordinary French polish, applied by means of the polisher's special appliance, the rubber. Dry shining, unlike glazing, is not in any degree a substitute for the difficult process of spiriting off, and those who think to get a high degree of finish on their work by means of dry shining may give up the illusion. When a really good finish is wanted, French polishing, as it is ordinarily understood, should be chosen, for there is no efficient substitute by which a like result can be got. Dry shining can be used in any position where a high degree of finish is not necessary or customary. It is useful for finishing inside work, such as the insides of boxes, drawers, cabinets, and interior parts generally, and is often seen on the fronts of drawers and trays enclosed in a wardrobe. The chief advantages in connection with it are that it can be done expeditiously, and therefore cheaply, that it sufficiently closes the grain of the wood to prevent dust getting in and clogging it, and that it gives a certain degree of finish which wood, left in the white or altogether unpolished, does not possess. The wood is bodied in without any preparatory filling, but otherwise precisely in the manner directed in Chapter 4. It is not customary to take such precautions to get up a good body as there recommended. A better description of the process is to say that the wood is wiped over with the polished rubber. Not much trouble is usually taken to do more than get the preliminary body worked on. There is no reason why the first body should not be allowed to sink, and the article then be rebodied if necessary. Much bodying in would make the work almost as hard as that involved in ordinary French polishing, so that ordinarily the bodying in dry shining is done more quickly. When the bodying in has been done to the satisfaction of the polisher, the rubber is charged with French polish rather more fully than was recommended for bodying. Instead of being rubbed all over the wood in any direction, it is wiped over in the direction of the grain from end to end of the piece, very much in the manner mentioned in connection with glazing. The rubber may be moved backwards and forwards till dry. but a better way, under ordinary circumstances, is to let the polish deposited by each rub dry before going over the same place again. When using the rubber in finishing, it should have no oil, and if the former of these two methods is adopted, it will be difficult to prevent the polish dragging, so the easier course should be adopted. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing by Paul Hasluck. Repolishing and Reviving. Having once mastered the fundamental principle of polishing, as explained in Chapter 3, it is a comparatively easy task to give to a plain piece of wood a level and lustrous surface, and by the use of stains that can be bought ready prepared, a fair imitation of any given wood can be obtained with but little labor. But the polisher who wishes to hold his own against all comers must be able to do more than merely to stain and polish a plain piece of new wood. When dealing with old work that requires repolishing, all dirt, grease, and furniture paste must be removed by careful washing with soda and warm water and powdered pumice stone or bath brick. It can then be French polished, or a fresher and more satisfactory appearance may be given by applying 1 or 2 coats of brown hard spirit polish, such as can be bought at an oil and color merchant's, carefully with a camel hair brush. When varnished work has to be dealt with, first clean off all the varnish and then repolish in the way described in previous chapters, except that filling will probably be dispensed with. The varnish can generally be more easily removed by scraping than by papering. With care, the varnish can be washed off with soda or potash and water, but on account of the liability to injure the wood, it is scarcely advisable to adopt this method. For removing polish from flat surfaces, the steel scrapers, as used by cabinet makers, are the best tools to use. In turn and other work, which has an uneven surface, the old coating can nearly all be got off by the application of strong hot soda water, to which may be added some oxalic acid in difficult cases. When a large quantity of work has to be treated, use the following mixture: 1/2 pound American potash, 1/2 pound soft soap, 1/2 pound rock ammonia, 1 pound washing soda, 3 ounces of nitric acid, 1 gallon of water. Apply with a fiber or scrubbing brush, taking care of the hands. Swill off with plenty of clean water. When the work is dry, oil and fill in, then repolish. Spirit varnish can be removed by washing with methylated spirit, which dissolves the lac. This is both a tedious and somewhat expensive method, which need be resorted to only for delicate moldings and other work which cannot well be cleaned by scraping or by scouring with some liquid, which, though it would remove the varnish, might stain and so spoil the wood. Methylated spirit, being neutral, may be used on any wood, as it will not affect the color. When dealing with cabinets or other built-up work, the process of repolishing will be simplified somewhat by taking apart as much as convenient. It is a good plan to unhinge all doors, to remove all carvings that may be screwed on from the back, and to remove all knobs, brass fittings, etc., not forgetting to put some tallying mark on each piece, which might be liable to misplacement. Thus, the doors can be better handled on the bench, the corners of panels can be worked up better, and the carvings can be varnished better. When the carvings are planted on, as is often done, a much cleaner job is made if these are first removed, for it is a difficult task to polish the open carvings equal to the flat surface. Sometimes polished work is disfigured by fine little lines which are caused by cracks resulting from sweating. These lines become visible through the dust settling on the exuding oil. This disfigurement can be averted almost entirely by occasionally carefully wiping with a soft, damp cloth. Sweating is not entirely preventable, but when the oil has ceased to exude, which may not be for some months, the work may be repolished with advantage. The perfectly level, brilliant polish found on new German pianos fills many an English French polisher with envy. Unfortunately, This brilliant polish does not last long, and the majority of the pianos soon have a greasy, cracked appearance. Indeed, there are but few of these pianos with a polish gained by the legitimate process of French polishing. This brilliant, level polish is gained by a very liberal use of gum sandarach, and when the polishing is completed, the pianos are set aside in a clean, hot room, which has the effect of causing the polish or gums to flow to one dead level. Some makers use varnish very freely, and, before passing to the hot room, level this by means of pumice powder, tripoli, putty powder, and sometimes flour. When the requisite number of coats of varnish have been laid, the surface is leveled with fine glass paper and linseed oil, or by the slower process of felt rubber and pumice powder. After being wiped perfectly clean, a rubber made of soft flannel, or better still, of old silk, is used to rub carefully and lightly in a circular direction with tripoli powder and oil, till the surface is perfectly level and inclined to be bright. It is then rubbed with dry putty powder and silk, and finally brightened with flour. The surface should be left perfectly free from any trace of the polishing powders. Neglect of this accounts for the white patches sometimes seen on the German pianos. These patches are not so deep as they appear at first sight, and may often be removed with flour emery and linseed oil or turps without disturbing the polish. To renovate the polish on these pianos is difficult, but when it is not very bad, a reviver made of equal parts linseed oil, lime water, and turps is generally effective. The lime water and oil are first thoroughly mixed, then the turps are added, and the mixture is applied by means of wadding. The surface is wiped off with a rag, and finished with a clean, soft rag swab, made fairly moist with methylated spirit. Should any trace of grease still remain, change to a clean place of the already moist rag, and sprinkle a few spots of glaze on its face, or, better still, wipe the face with the glazed rubber over the face of the clean swab. Should this method prove ineffective, it will be necessary to repolish, first by removing the sweat or roughness by fine glass paper and oil, or by washing with weak soda water and pumice powder. The polish used should be made with spirit instead of naphtha, and to ensure its lasting qualities, it should be bodied up one day and finished the next. To darken the birch frame of a chair, wipe it over with asphaltum dissolved in turpentine, 1 pennyworth in half a pint of turps. This stains without giving a painted appearance. Should there be any difficulty in obtaining asphaltum, Vandyke brown may be used, mixed to a thin paste with liquid ammonia, or with a strong solution of common washing soda. This is thinned with water till of the required tone, which will readily be found by trying its effect on any odd piece of wood. If French polish cannot be applied, the most suitable thing to use is brown hard spirit varnish. For restoring polish that has faded from damp or exposure to the sun, those stains which are used to stain the common woods will not be suitable. It may be convenient to remove only the upper surface of the polish, to color the faded portion so as to match its surroundings, and to repolish the whole. When the polish is not very bad, it is generally sufficient to smooth it well with a piece of worn glass paper. When it is much scratched or faded, methylated spirit should be sprinkled upon it, and the surface well rubbed with No. 1 glass paper, applied with a circular motion. It will then be found that only the upper surface of the polish will be removed. Before repolishing, it is advisable first to wash the article with water, to which a little common washing soda has been added. This will remove any dirt, furniture paste, etc. A little pumice powder or powdered bath brick may be used to assist. After the necessary cleaning off of dirt, etc., has been accomplished, any bruises must be removed, either by scraping out or by bringing up level by means of a hot iron and moisture, or by filling up with hard stopping, or by the still better method given on page 69. When this has been done, and all defective parts made good, the surface must be wiped over with an oily rag. It assists the new polish to take kindly to the old. In scraping out the bruises, in cleaning off level any new piece, and in cleaning off the polish, it is probable that light patches may be made. More especially will these be apparent if the damaged portion has been previously colored up by stains, dry colors, or dyed polish. For coloring up or matching, it is generally sufficient if the wood in hand is mahogany, to wipe over the damaged portion with red oil, which consists of 1/4 pound of alkanet root steeped in 1 pint of linseed oil, working up with red polish. Should the wood be walnut, many a little blemish and scratch in soft resinous varnish may be matched by wiping over with a solution of 1 pennyworth of asphaltum dissolved in 1/2 pint turps. Should the defect be a piece of sap or other light portion, go over the light portion several times with a polished rubber to prevent the grain from rising, and then saturate a small tuft of wadding with 3 parts of methylated spirits to 1 part of polish. On this wadding, place a small quantity of Van Dyke brown or brown umber, mix well, and carefully wipe over the light portions, thinning out with spirits if too dark, picking up a little more color if not dark enough, adding a little black if required. Matching stains are used in French polishing because light and dark pieces often occur in the best selected woods, and in stained work, owing to the differences in the direction of the grain. To tone or harmonize the entire surface to one uniform shade, it is technically called matching or coloring up, and requires a little tact and a good eye for color. On large flat surfaces, colored polish may be used with advantage, but for small work it would be better to take a small tuft of wadding and wet it with 1 part polish to 3 parts spirits. With this, take up a little yellow ochre and just a trace of umber or Van Dyke brown. Press the wadding well on the back of a piece of worn-out glass paper to equalize, and mix well. Try the effect on an odd corner of the work. If too dark, thin out with spirits. If not dark enough, pick up more color or wipe over twice. Having gained the right shade, apply lightly with a straight or wavy motion as required. This would enable one to match the oak, but any wood can be matched by using suitable pigments, a red tinge being usually given by the addition of a few drops of Bismarck brown stain. Though it is possible to proceed to polish direct, yet it would be safer to set the stain by giving a coat of thin spirit varnish and allowing this to get quite dry before polishing. In matching up satin walnut, the polisher must use judgment, for the work can hardly be regarded as mechanical. The stain must depend on the color or tint of the lighter parts, and of the darker parts to which they are to be matched. Generally, a little weak brown stain will do what is required. When necessary, it can be altered slightly in color by the addition of other pigments according to the tints desired. In matching, the wavy appearance of some woods may be given by a tremulous movement of the hand, and the mottled appearance of others by dabbing with a badger softener or clean, soft dusting brush while the color is still wet. Veins, either black or red, may be given by picking up a little dry black or red stain on the corner of the tuft of wadding and applying it carefully, taking some adjacent portion as a guide for pattern. For rosewood, red stain and dry black may be used in combination. For birch or oak, use yellow ochre. When the work in hand is large and requires staining all over, and it is not possible to gain the desired result by means of dyed polish applied with a rubber, the color should be mixed in a pot with 3 parts of spirit to 1 of polish, and applied with a camel hair brush. The work is not so liable to get patchy with 2 or more coats of weak stain as with 1 strong one. After laying on the stain, allow a few minutes to elapse for it to set, then smooth down with a piece of worn fine glass paper, and give a coat of thin brush polish or spirit varnish. This will set the colors previous to polishing, which can be proceeded with in about 10 minutes. Mahogany, rosewood, and walnut, if not inlaid, are generally improved by the use of a polish tinged by the addition of a little red stain. Other colors may also be mixed with polish to be applied with a rubber. When using these dyed polishes, cease when just the right tinge is attained. Another rubber may be used to finish off with clear polish. In repolishing work, the foundation having already been laid, the polish is not required quite so thick as in polishing the bare wood. In the final stage, when finishing off, any trace of greasiness may be effectually removed by well rubbing with a swab of clean, soft rag, fairly damp, not wet, with spirits, on the face of which has been sprinkled a few drops of glaze. Colors in a dry state, known as pigments, such as Venetian red, yellow ochre, vegetable black or lamp black, umbers, Van Dyke brown, chromes, orange and lemon, greens, blues, flake white, etc., are useful. By the aid of these, the polisher is enabled to match woods and restore faded polish far more expeditiously than can be done by staining or using dyed polish or varnish. Work that might puzzle the inexperienced for hours can be done in a few minutes by knowledge of the use of dry colors. They are used in some stains by mixing with ammonia, glue size, pear ash, soda, and they are used to color the filling in of whiting and terps to make it match the various woods. Venetian red is used for mahogany, umber for walnut, black for ebony, and sometimes to give an appearance of age to oak by making the grain appear dirty. Sometimes the polisher has a job passed to him that, properly speaking, ought to be done by the painter. The quick drying nature of the solutions of shellac, with which the polisher is better acquainted, obtains for him the preference. For example, shields, etc., for decorative purposes that may require 5 different colors and a coat of varnish, can be colored ready for fixing within 24 hours. To do this, lime blue, chrome yellow, vegetable black, flake white, and vermillionette, or any other colors, should be mixed with ordinary French polish to the consistency of thin paint, thinning out when necessary with methylated spirits. 3 coats of color can be laid on, stencil patterns cut and painted, borders and edges lined, and the whole finished with a coat of white hard varnish within 12 hours. To prevent the white getting a yellowish tinge, it is well to mix it with transparent polish made from white shellac. To make imitation marble which wears well, give several coats of flake white mixed in polish, then put in the veins of blue or black with feathers, afterwards giving a coat of white thinned out with spirits. This has the effect of making the veining appear beneath the surface. When dry, it is finished by giving a coat of good quality copal varnish. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Wood Finishing, comprising staining, varnishing, and polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, comprising staining, varnishing, and polishing, by Paul Hasluck. Hard stopping, or beaumontage. The French polisher who does much repairing and repolishing finds hard stopping, or beaumontage, exceedingly useful, for if carefully selected as regards color, it is difficult to distinguish it from the wood when polished over. The polisher may be called upon to repolish furniture from which little bits of veneer are chipped off, or in which some bruise, crack, or blister presents itself. With his glue pot, veneer, and cauls at hand, the cabinet maker might let in little bits of wood, or run in hot glue, and apply cauls, hand screws, or weights, as may be required. The polisher may be out of reach of such appliances, and to call in assistance would take away all his profit, besides hindering him with his job. Something that will enable him to make level all defects in a short time, and to proceed at once with his polishing, is found in hard stopping. The skilled cabinet maker should make all his joints fit closely, and arrange his nails and screws in such a position that their heads will be out of sight, and leave no holes or defects to need filling up. But he will find it difficult to select all his wood, and to prevent any slip or accident, so that his work shall have neither flaw, shaken, or hole, and he will welcome a composition that will fill up and obliterate all defects. A mixture of beeswax and resin, in about equal parts, is used by some for such a purpose, and it is usually made up in 2 colors, red for mahogany and brown for walnut. The cabinet maker has little need for such a composition as beaumontage when making new work, but it is a boon to those who have to depend largely upon repairs and chance jobs for their livelihood, and to those who have made some useful or ornamental article with a packing case or other cheap class of wood. With such material, it will be found extremely difficult so to select the wood and cut it that a nail or screw hole or a flaw does not occasionally present itself. Beaumontage has advantages over putty or beeswax in resin. Putty, in drying, always shrinks, showing plainly an indentation in the case of cracks and screw holes. If used on white wood before staining and polishing, Its oily nature prevents the stain sinking into the wood as deeply as in the parts untouched by it, thus causing the work to have a patchy appearance. In beeswax and resin, the chief fault is the want of variety, the colors being limited. In most cases, it is kept in an iron ladle or large spoon, which is not convenient for a polisher to carry with him in his kit when going away from home to work. Hard stopping can be made up in an infinite variety of colors, like sticks of sealing wax, and it can, with care, be selected to match any wood. It will not shrink, but retains a level surface and takes the polish well. These points alone are sufficient to establish its superiority over beeswax and resin or putty. The greater the variety of colors, the more its usefulness becomes apparent. It gives a better chance of matching, and often saves the staining which might be necessary if little bits of veneer were let in. Beaumontage is easily made, but can be bought ready for use at most places where veneers and fancy woods are sold for about 1 penny per stick. It is generally called stopping out wax. It is also sold at 1 shilling 6 pence per pound in various colors. To make a hard stopping, plane up 2 pieces of wood, about 5/8 of an inch thick, 15 or 18 inches long, and 9 inches wide, one of which should be screwed on the bench. Take a cupful of any common shellac, put it in a tin or iron pot, a half-pound mustard or coffee tin will do, add a teaspoon of powdered resin, a piece of beeswax the size of half a walnut, and a teaspoonful of powdered lemon chrome. Heat till the whole is melted, stir with a stick to properly mix, and pour a little of the melted composition on the fixed board. Then gather it up by means of a scraper or knife, roll out between the hands, and while still plastic, roll into sticks between the 2 boards by passing the uppermost or loose board to and fro. If the loose board is made warm by keeping it before the fire when not in use, it gives a better result. Care must be taken not to get the composition too hot, as it spoils by boiling. It will require practice before perfectly round sticks can be made. Proceed to make sticks of stopping in the following way. Pour sufficient of this mixture to make 2 sticks of this color, then add a little yellow ochre and make 2 more. These will give 2 shades that will do nicely for oak. Add a little brown umber, warm up again, and roll out 2 more. These will do for light walnut. Add a little more umber, and make sticks for dark walnut. Add Venetian red for mahogany, and a little black for rosewood, and finally finish up with black for ebony. By varying the amount of dry colors, any number of shades can be obtained, and it will be found convenient to make the colors in the order suggested. If the darker shades are made first, it will be found difficult to obtain the lighter ones, owing to the dark colors clinging to the sides of the pot. To use this hard stopping, a piece of flat metal that will retain heat for a few minutes would be wanted. A worn-out 6-inch flat file in a handle would do admirably. For an inch or so from the point, the file teeth should be removed by the aid of a grindstone. To stop a crack, nail, or screw hole, select a stick of stopping the required shade, bearing in mind that if the wood you are worked upon is intended to be afterwards stained, it will be necessary to select stopping of the color which the article is intended to be when finished, for the stopping itself cannot be stained after it is in the wood. Have the iron hot, and hold it in the right hand. With the other, press the stick of stopping against it, as the stopping is run into the defective part, somewhat similarly to the way in which the tinker uses his copper bit and solder. When the crack is well filled, and a little over, press the stopping well in while the iron is still warm. When cold, clean off level with a sharp chisel, scraper, or knife, and then use glass paper. It will help the stopping to hold in a shallow bruise if a few holes are made in the bruised part with a brad awl or chisel. In burr walnut, or other fancy figured wood, round holes are best. In straight-grained wood, such as bay or mahogany, a straight cut from a chisel or knife is preferable. A bruise may often be raised level with the surface again. Where this can be done, it is preferable to the use of beaumontage. It is done by pouring methylated spirit in the hollow which forms the bruise, and setting it on fire, blowing it out before the spirit is extinguished, to prevent it burning the wood. It will be found in most cases that the bruises come up level with the surface, but if badly bruised, it will require more than one application of spirit, the flame of which must always be blown out before the spirit itself is entirely burnt away. Bruises of nearly every description can be raised in this way. A hot iron applied near to the dent which has been wetted will also bring it up level. If veneered work is blistered, make a number of round holes or straight slits in the raised part, and run some stopping in, and press down with a hot iron. With care, this is a more expeditious plan than opening the blister, putting hot glue under, and applying weights or pressure. The stopping holds the veneer down like pegs or nails. Beeswax, made up of various colors, will be found useful. Slight fissures in the veneers, imperfect joints, or places where the stopping is not quite filled up, may be made much more presentable by the aid of this. Heel ball and cobbler's wax, though sometimes used, cannot be recommended, as they seldom take polish well. Colored beeswax, made up in the form and size of heel balls, will be found convenient, and it can be made, as described for stopping, by melting the wax and adding the various colors, then running it into molds. A few 1¼ holes bored through a piece of hard wood about 1/2 inch thick, and this screwed to another piece, makes a convenient mold in which to run the melted wax. When cold, the discs of wax are easily removed if the 2 pieces of wood be unscrewed. In making good the defects in work that is old, and which has been previously polished, it will be found that the necessary cleaning off will leave a bare patch. This should be wiped over with a little linseed oil, then bodied up, and a few hours or a night allowed in which to harden before finally bodying up and finishing. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing by Paul Hasluck. Treatment of floors. The custom of staining and varnishing floors has, apart from sanitary and hygienic reasons, and its lightening of the daily labor of cleaning, much to recommend it. The margin of the floors, from 12 inches to 36 inches wide, is stained and either varnished or polished, and art, oriental, or other squares and rugs are used in the middle only, instead of the whole of the floor being covered with carpet. The margin left on the stairs by the stair carpet is similarly treated. From an artistic standpoint, much might be said in favor of this plan. The working man generally contents himself with simply staining and varnishing in some neutral color, mostly in imitation of walnut. His wealthier neighbor has a margin of parquetry, made of various kinds of wood and veneer or blocks, carefully selected and joined together by experienced hands in geometrical designs. These are generally finished by the process known as wax polish. Whether in the near future these artistic borderings will be used in the homes of the artisan remains to be seen. At present, he has to content himself with floorcloth, linoleum, or stained floorboards. In America, they have what are called hardwood floors, made of veneers cut to various designs and secured in position by strong cloth or canvas backing, and made up in designs, usually 1 foot 6 inches by 4 foot, for covering the central part of a floor. For the margins, a separate design is worked out, usually in 12-foot lengths and of various widths. The boarded floor having been made perfectly level, this parquetry is secured to it by fine brads driven through nearly every piece of wood. These brads are punched a little below the surface, and the holes filled up with putty colored to match the wood. After cleaning off and glass papering the hard wood, it is finished by oil or wax polish. It may not be amiss here to offer a few suggestions to those who are not quite able to decide whether their carpet shall fit close to the walls, or whether a square carpet shall be laid in the center, leaving a margin all round to be stained, or, as is often the case, covered with some kind of floor cloth. The disadvantage of a close-fitted carpet is that it cannot, without difficulty, be taken up, and, as this is not done frequently, dirt accumulates. A square of carpet, however it is laid, can be taken up and relaid without much trouble. On the score of economy, strong arguments can be given in favor of squares. The initial cost is considerably less, for there is little or no cutting to waste, even when the square is made up of ordinary carpeting, whereas in a room having a carpet closely fitted to the floor, a considerable quantity may be, and often is, cut to waste. Thus, saving is effected by using a smaller carpet, there being no waste in material. The only objection to squares that can be seriously urged has merely to do with the question of appearance, as some people think that a floor which is carpeted all over looks more comfortable. Preparing the floor. Before anything in the way of staining can be done, the floor must be made perfectly level. If it is an old flooring, pull up any nails which have been used for fastening carpets. The nail holes may be filled with putty, but in recesses and dark corners it may not be necessary to take this trouble. All floor nails should be punched in at least 1/8 of an inch below the surface. If the boards do not fit closely together, fill in all openings with strips of wood, planed wedge shape. These should be brushed over with glue on both sides, then driven well home with a mallet, and allowed to stand till next day before planing off level. If an ordinary smoothing plane is used for this surface, it will be found impossible to plane lengthwise close up to the skirting board. A useful plane for such a purpose is known as a bullnose, a section of which is shown in Figure 8. With this, it is possible to smooth the floor to within 1/4 of an inch of the skirting. The remaining portion can be smoothed with a chisel and finished with glass paper. The floor, whether newly laid or not, must be perfectly free from grease and paint. To ensure this, it is a wise plan to give it a good scouring with hot water, in which common soda has been dissolved instead of soap. When the floor is perfectly dry, give another rub down with No. 1 glass paper. The best thing to use to scrub a dirty floor is a common brick or a bath brick. The brick is dipped in soda water and used like a scrubbing brush. Lump pumice stone is also used for this purpose. For the purpose of stopping up nail holes, etc., plaster of Paris is sometimes recommended. Should it be used, it must be done previous to any staining. Putty is the material in most general use, but on no account must it be used with stains that are mixed with water. As putty is a mixture of whiting and linseed oil, this will prevent the stain sinking into the wood. Consequently, a patchy appearance will be the result. Should the stains have a spirit, oil, or varnish basis, it is of little moment when the holes are filled up, though it is wise to give the floor at least 1 coat of stain first. The putty or plaster should be colored to match the stain by the addition of some coloring medium. If the floor be a dirty or discolored one, it is advisable to plane all over the portion to be stained, otherwise the difference between new and old, clean and dirty surfaces will probably be plainly discernible. So far we have presumed that the floor is of a common spruce or deal. Should it be of oak, equal pains must be taken in its preparation. A simple and effective way to stain floors is to take 1 pint of methylated spirit. In this dissolve 4 ounces of shellac, then add, for a walnut color, as much brown umber as will give the tone required in 2 or more applications. Similarly, Venetian red may be added for mahogany, and yellow ochre for pine. Apply this with a brush to the boards, and when dry, smooth down with fine glass paper. By wiping over with a little linseed oil on flannel, it will be kept fresh looking, or it may be finished bright by giving 2 coats of best oak varnish. It also forms a capital basis for wax or French polish. Marking out the floor. For good workmanship, it is essential that the floor should be marked out, and all staining done to a clean-cut edge, particularly if it is intended to finish with a border or stencil pattern. In deciding what width the margin shall be, allow at least 3 inches of the stained portion to be underneath the carpet. Thus, on laying down the carpet, if the edge is found to stand 18 inches from the skirting, mark the margin to be stained at least 21 inches wide. This marking out is sometimes dispensed with, the work being done in a haphazard fashion, and sometimes the carpet is fixed previous to staining and varnishing. Both methods are to be deprecated. They stamp the work as having been done by inexperienced hands. Staining. Unquestionably, the best method is that of using stains first, then sizing and varnishing, unless it should be thought that varnish is too bright and glaring. In that case, it may be finished by wax polish, oil polish, or French polishing. But it must be borne in mind that for the last named process, the floor must be exceptionally well cleaned up. Varnish is to be recommended generally for use in ordinary rooms. It requires less attention to keep in order than wax. An occasional coat of varnish will restore the margin to its original gloss. Wax-polished floors require rubbing frequently, and they cannot be washed without destroying the gloss, so the style of finish is not strongly advocated, except for floors used for dancing purposes. As traffic over waxed floors soon destroys their gloss, it is advisable to have plenty of mats or rugs lying about, especially near the doorway. Oiling has few, if any, advantages beyond the cheapness of the work, and can hardly be recommended as suitable for ordinary dwelling houses. At its best, an oil floor never looks as well as one that is varnished, and it is only where there is much traffic, and when expense is a prime consideration, that this is the most suitable finish. Floors are not often French polished, but spirit varnish of good quality may be used on floors that are not subject to much hard wear. Whatever may be the method decided upon for the finish, staining must first be done. This is usually in imitation of oak or walnut, but there is no particular reason, beyond custom, why other colors should not be used. Several well-known makes of stain are in the market, which can be confidently recommended for the purpose. Those who desire to make their own stain will find full particulars in Chapter 11. But there is no better recipe than Van Dyke brown, ammonia, and water. The proportions are of little importance. The Van Dyke brown is mixed with the ammonia to form a thin paste. Water must afterwards be added to reduce the strength and liquefy the stain. A thin paste is mentioned, and it must be understood that a thick paste is not satisfactory, but the mixture may be diluted to almost any extent without detriment. Care must be taken that the brown is thoroughly mixed. The mixed brown and ammonia paste may be kept as a stock preparation to be used with water as may be required, or it may have water added and be kept in a diluted state ready for use. It is advisable to mix at least as much as will suffice to do a room entirely, and so avoid a difficulty in matching a fresh mixture to an exact shade. As to the quantity required, it has already been pointed out, see page 16, that 1 gallon will cover 100 square yards, 1 gallon of varnish being required for the same surface. When the stain is already in a paint kettle or other convenient receptacle, select a large sash tool, as used by painters, and a fitch or small sash tool for doing the edges. Apply the stain plentifully, lengthways of the floorboards, commencing at the right or left of the fireplace and working round to the door. Recommence on the other side of the fireplace, working round towards the door again, so allowing free ingress to the room without interfering with the staining operations. Allow the stain several hours to dry. Should the color not be sufficiently dense, repeat the operation as before, bearing in mind that 2 coats of a lighter shade will give a better result and be more evenly distributed than 1 coat of a darker color. It is strongly advised that experiments should be made on odd pieces of wood to get the desired color before commencing the floor. Care should be taken, especially if potash or soda has been used in it, not to let the stain get on a painted skirting board. If a simple margin of 1 uniform color is all that is wanted, it will now be ready for 1 or 2 coats of clear size. Size is used to economize varnish. It is much cheaper and fills the grain of the wood, which thus absorbs less varnish and allows it to remain on the surface where it is wanted. If the varnish sinks, there is comparatively little gloss. The size may be obtained of almost any oil and colorant. It is applied to the floor like the stain, and must be allowed to become thoroughly dry before varnishing. After sizing, fill up with plaster Paris, made into a thin paste with water, all nail holes and crevices in which it has been found impracticable to insert slips of wood. Combine stains and varnish. With a view to simplifying the process, varnish makers have put upon the market combined stains and varnish. These stains claim to give tones varying from light oak to dark walnut. The latter color is gained by giving successive coats. Their use is not strongly recommended, except where the lighter tones have been chosen, and then The work is given a finishing coat of good oak varnish to equalize it in appearance and body. For a wax polished floor, it is only necessary to stain, and then, when dry, wax polish in accordance with the instructions given in the chapter devoted to that subject. The same remarks apply to oil finishing, except that it will be understood that the same care is not necessary as with furniture. Indeed, on a floor it is useless to get polish with oil, which is useful to enrich the color of the stain, and that is all. A very useful stain may be made by thinning ordinary paint with turpentine. Of course, the turpentine causes the paint to dry flat or dead, but a coat of varnish will soon alter this. Decorative borders. Some rooms may be improved in appearance by a decorative border, as shown in the suggestive illustrations. Figure 9. These borders need not be elaborate in design. Simple yet bold patterns give the better general effect, on the same principle that the carpet designer does not rely so much on the elaboration of detail as on the careful selection and blending of colors. Presuming that the floor margin has been stained brown and the inner edge left clean cut, mark out the portion it is intended to decorate. The groundwork of this may be pine, satinwood, or light mahogany. The colors selected for the stencil should then be in marked contrast, such as rosewood, black, or brown. Stencil plates may be bought, or they may be cut out of paper hangers' lining paper, care being taken to cut them clean and sharp, and to leave in sufficient tie pieces or break lines to hold the stencil intact. Give the paper stencil plates a coat of linseed oil to strengthen and preserve them. Mix the stencil paint to the color decided upon, and the consistency of a stiff paste. Take up a little of this with a stencil brush, Figure 10, which is specially made for the purpose, and spread it on a slate or smooth piece of board. Then stipple it through the stencil plate. If care is taken to keep the stencil plate motionless on the work during the process of applying the paint, and the brush has not been charged with too much at a time, the pattern should be clearly and sharply imprinted on the floor. Should the imitation of tiles be attempted, mark them out to correspond with the boards. That is, with boards 7 inches wide, set out the tiles 7 inches square, and these may be subdivided at pleasure. The reason for this precaution should be apparent. Should the board shrink, it would certainly not look well to see a row of tiles apparently cracked. Black or other dark color lines of at least 1/2 inch wide should divide the plain from the decorated portions of a floor, and on the inner edge of the decoration, a width of at least 3 inches should be stained the same color as the margin. The lines may be put in with a lining fitch or pencil, using the thick paint as advised for the stencils, or suitable colors may be mixed with equal parts of French polish and spirits. Imitation tiles should be outlined with black or brown lines at least 1/16 inch wide. A glance at some printed floor cloth or linoleum will show how this is done. Finishing processes. All staining and decorating being finished, the work is then sized, care being taken to use a size only moderately hot, and to work the brush about as little as possible to avoid breaking up the colors. It is then allowed to get quite dry. It is next smoothed down with fine worn glass paper. All dust is removed, and 1 or 2 coats of good varnish, such as hard oak, are laid on with a brush, starting next to the fireplace, as advised in staining. Whatever varnish is used, it should be laid on with a brush, and it may be noted, as in staining, that 2 coats thinly laid on are better than 1 coat applied thickly. In many cases, 1 coat is all that is needed. Let the varnish stand several days to harden before allowing it to be walked on. The feet of chairs or other portions of furniture resting upon the varnished surface should be kept from scratching it by gluing onto them pieces of cloth or wash leather. Should the varnish get scratched or show white marks, try the effect of wiping over with a little linseed oil. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11 of Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing by Paul Hasluck. Stains. Some general information on processes of staining wood is given in Chapter 2. The present chapter will deal chiefly with the making of various kinds of stains. The following recipes apply to the staining of common woods to imitate the more costly. Walnut. A. 1 pennyworth nut galls, 1 pennyworth Vandyke brown, 1/4 pound American potash, 1 gallon water. Cost 4d. per gallon. The nut galls should be crushed and mixed with the potash, and the water added hot. The stain may be used hot or cold. A little brown umber may be included in the mixture if desired. B. Mix Vandyke brown, or equal parts Vandyke brown and brown umber, into a thin paste with liquor ammonia. Thin down to the required tone with water. It is not absolutely necessary to use ammonia in the walnut stain, but it is better to do so. The smell will soon evaporate, and it can hardly be objectionable if the stain stands for a few days before using it. Caustic soda or potash may be used instead of ammonia, but against these objections may be urged. C. 1/4 pound asphaltum dissolved in 1 pint turpentine or coal tar naphtha. This is useful for common work, but requires to be coated with brush polish or varnish before it will polish readily. D. 1 gallon strong vinegar, 1 pound burnt umber, 1/2 pound rose pink, 1/2 pound Vandyke brown. Apply with brush or sponge. E. 2 ounces of common black privet berries, such as grow in most gardens, may be gathered in the winter season. 1/2 pint solution of ammonia. Applied to pine woods to be polished or varnished, this is said to give a very good imitation, hard to detect from real walnut. F. For cheap work, such as floor margins, use ordinary glue size, colored by the addition of brown umber and a very little black or red. This should be applied with a brush, and then well rubbed in with a piece of rag. 1 or more coats may be given, according to the tone required. When dry, smooth down fine glass paper before applying the varnish. G. When the staining of floors first came into vogue, the stain largely adopted was a solution of 1 ounce permanganate of potash to a quart of water. Though purple, this dries a rich brown color when laid, and has the merit of imitating no particular wood, but gives a color that harmonizes with most carpets. For further information on staining floors, see Chapter 10. H. 2 ounces Vandyke brown, 2 ounces American potash, 1 ounce bichromate of potash, a piece of soda the size of a walnut, the same amount of sulfate of copper, a small piece of sulfate of iron, 2 ounces nitric acid, and 1 gallon of water. Boil the water, brown, bichromate, soda, and sulfates until melted and well mixed. Then add the American potash, which must be first put in a little water, otherwise it will effervesce over the sides of the pot. When lukewarm, add the acid. Extract of walnut is now looked upon as an old-time method, owing partly to the difficulty of obtaining the green walnuts when out of season. Something always at hand is preferred. The extract can easily be made by bruising the walnuts and adding common washing soda and hot water. J. Ordinary white wood can be given the appearance of black walnut by first thoroughly drying the wood, and, when warmed, coating it 2 or 3 times with a strong solution of walnut peel. The wood thus treated is washed over when nearly dry with a solution of bichromate of potash, 1 part in 5 parts of boiling water. When thoroughly dried, rub and polish. Oak. A. Wipe over with crushed asphaltum dissolved in turpentine, 1/4 pound to the pint. B. Take some brown umber, mix into a thin paste with liquor ammonia, then thin out with water till the required shade is gained. C. One of the simplest methods of staining deal and obtaining the dull polish seen on very dark oak is to stain it and then varnish with flattening varnish as follows. First, see that the work is entirely free from glue, grease, and rough places, and then stain twice with dark oak stain, softening down between each coat before the stain dries with a soft brush called a badger, which will take out brush marks left in staining. This must be done thoroughly and quickly, as any touching up is almost sure to show. When the stain is dry, rub it down with a piece of canvas, not glass paper, which is very liable to leave white marks. The canvas can be got more easily into the hollows of columns and moldings. In all stained work, the less glass paper used, even in preparing the work, the better. In no case may the paper be used across the grain, as it is sure to show. Coat twice with the best clear size, rubbing down between each coat as explained for staining. If the work is varnished with good flattening varnish, and then hard rubbed with a soft rag or piece of silk, the surface should have a nice dull gloss. D. The following mixture allows of great latitude in shade as well as in actual color, according to the quantity of water. Van Dyke brown mixed with liquor ammonia, and then diluted with water, a little Bismarck brown being added to give the reddish tint required. E. Another good stain may be made by absorbing dichromate of potash in water. By modifying this with Van Dyke brown or Stevens walnut stain, almost any required shade of brown may be obtained. Alone, it gives rather too much of an orange hue, so some persons prefer to add a little walnut stain, which removes the reddish cast or harshness. It is easy to give several applications if one is not strong enough. Apply the stain with a brush and allow it to turn color by action of light and air. The stain is useful for a variety of purposes. Thus, light oak may be made to match brown or pollard oak, common baywood to match superior mahogany, and common mahogany to represent Old Spanish. No hard and fast rule can be laid down as to whether the work should be previously oiled or not. Some claim that if it is not oiled, the stain will strike deeper. On the other hand, experience proves that if the work is oiled first, the stain is more evenly distributed, and that the grain does not rise to the same extent, but it should be well rubbed in, not left merely on the top of the oil. Permanganate of potash may be used instead of bichromate of potash. See Stains for Walnut, page 81. F. Yellow pine can be stained to resemble oak in color by very simple means, but if it is intended that the figure should also be imitated, this will be found a more difficult task. A rich dark color can be gained by dissolving 2 pounds of patent size in 1 pint of water, adding some brown umber to give a brown shade, applying while still hot with a brush, and wiping off all surplus with a piece of rag. When dry, smooth down with a piece of canvas or coarse rag, and fill up all nail holes, etc., with stopping colored to match. Then, to gain the rich brown color, wipe over with a solution of 1/4 pound of asphaltum in 1 pint of turps. Allow this to stand till the next day to harden. Then varnish with church oak varnish of good quality. G. Should it be desired to imitate the figure or grain of oak as well as the color, satisfactory results may be obtained by using size and yellow ochre instead of umber. Pass a steel graining comb over the asphaltum when nearly set, and wipe clean a few light places with a piece of rag slightly wet with turps and held in position over the thumb of the right hand. The sap marks will be concealed if they are coated at least twice with the size and color. In either case, experiment on a few odd pieces of similar wood previous to attempting the actual work. H. A much admired orange-yellow tone may be imparted to oak by rubbing it with a mixture of about 3 ounces of tallow and 3/4 ounce of wax, with 1 pint of oil of turpentine. Mix by heating together and stirring. This is used in a warm room, when the wood acquires a dull polish. It is coated after an hour with thin polish, repeating the coating of polish to improve the depth and brilliancy of the tone. Dark oak. A. Take Van Dyke brown, 1/4 pound, ammonia, 1/2 pint, and mix with water. B. Mix 2 ounces of pearl ash and 2 ounces American potash in a quart of hot water, and apply to the parts to be stained. C. 2 ounces Van Dyke brown, 1 pint liquid ammonia, 1 ounce bichromate of potash. A tinge of red in the potash or varnish will improve these. D. 2 pennyworth of Van Dyke brown in oil, 1/8 pint of terebinth, 1/8 pint of turpentine, and 1/4 pint of kerosene or paraffin oil. Mix well and try on a piece of plain deal, first laying it on thinly with a piece of sponge or old felt. If too dark, add more paraffin. This stain may be brightened by using more or less of raw sienna, also ground in oil, instead of all Van Dyke, thinning as required with paraffin oil. By some, it is used largely for trade purposes, being cheap, easily and quickly applied, having a nice appearance, and leaving the work with a smooth surface ready for polishing or varnishing. 4 ounces American potash, 4 ounces Van Dyke brown. The potash must first be dissolved in a little water. Boil the brown in a gallon of water, and while hot, add the potash. A cheap substitute for dark oak stain can be obtained by thinning down with turpentine good Brunswick black to the shade required. But unless one thoroughly knows the nature of these materials, this plan had better not be adopted. Imitation antiques are thus treated and finished by wax polishing. Maple. Yellow pine, simply varnished with 2 or 3 coats of copal, or sized twice and varnished once, will be as near the tone of maple as can be got without painting and graining. Mahogany. Common work, such as kitchen tables, chairs, etc., is generally wiped over with glue size, heavily stained with Venetian red, the desired tone being brought up by means of colored polish and varnish. For better class work, it is better to wipe over first with a weak walnut stain, then a mahogany stain, which may be made by dissolving in water or spirits a little Bismarck brown. This is a very powerful pigment, and as much as will stand on a shilling will color a pint of polish probably sufficient for general use, though more or less may be added according to the intensity desired. Strain through muslin before using. A French plan is to first rub the surface with diluted nitric acid, to prepare it for the materials subsequently applied. It is afterward treated with several applications of a filtered solution of 1½ ounce dragon's blood, dissolved in 1 pint methylated spirit, to which has been added 1/2 ounce carbonate of soda. A light brown mahogany color may be given by means of 1/2 pound madder and 1/4 pound fustic to 1 gallon of water applied hot. Boil 1/2 pound of madder and 2 ounces of logwood chips in 1 gallon of water, and brush well over the work while hot. When dry, go over the whole with a solution of pearl ash, 2 drachms to a quart of water. Another cheap mahogany stain is this. Put 2 ounces of bruised dragon's blood in a bottle with a quart of turpentine, and stand in a warm place. Shake frequently, and when dissolved, apply the mixture to the work. To stain common baywood to resemble mahogany, wipe over with thread oil, made by soaking 1/4 pound alkanet root in 1 pint of linseed oil. While still wet with oil, wipe over and well rub in a weak solution of bichromate of potash, 1 ounce to 1 pint of water. Afterwards fill in and use red polish. Wipe over with a weak walnut stain and let this dry. Then use red oil and fill in and polish with red polish. Water strongly impregnated with common lime, washing soda, or carbonate of soda will give to common mahogany tones varying from light Spanish to dark rosewood. Any alkali will darken mahogany. Rosewood. Stain first with a solution of 1 ounce extract of logwood, 1 quart of water, put in the figure by the aid of feathers or camel hair pencils dipped in copperas solution or black stain, or add a little bichromate of potash to the hot solution of logwood, and grain with that and a large feather cut so that it will make 3 or 4 streaks at once. Rosewood grain can thus be easily imitated. First coat with mahogany stain. The figure can be put in with a small tuft of wadding or sponge dipped in black stain or black polish. 1/4 pound camwood, 2 ounces red sanders, 4 ounces extract of logwood, 1/2 ounce aquafortis, 1 quart water. This gives a bright red ground. Put in the figure with copperas solution or black stain, and tone down with asphaltum dissolved in turps. In a bottle, mix 1/4 pound of extract of logwood, 1 ounce salts of tartar, and 1 pint of water. In another bottle, Put 1 pound of old iron in small pieces and 1 pint of vinegar. After standing 24 hours, it will be ready for use. To 1 pint of varnish, add 1/4 pound of finely powdered rose pink. Stain the wood with 2 coats of the logwood, allowing the first to become nearly dry before applying the second. A piece of rattan cane, sharpened at one end to a wedge shape and pounded so as to separate the fibers, will form a good brush. Dip this in the vinegar, and with it form the grain, after which give the work a coat of the varnish and rose pink. When staining, study the natural wood and imitate it as nearly as possible. The above material, skillfully applied to any common wood, will make it resemble rosewood so nearly that it will be difficult to distinguish the difference. Boil 1 pound of logwood in 1 gallon of water. Add a double handful of green walnut shells. Boil the whole again. Strain the liquor, and add to it 1 pint of the best vinegar. It is then ready for use. Apply it boiling hot, and when the wood is dry, form red veins in imitation of the grain of rosewood with a brush dipped in the following solution: nitric acid, 1 pint, metallic tin, 1 ounce, sal ammoniac, 1 ounce. Mix and set aside to dissolve, occasionally shaking. Ebony. A. The usual method is to first coat the wood with a solution of 2 ounces logwood extract, 1/2 ounce copperas, 1 quart water. Add a dash of china blue or indigo. Boil in an iron pot, apply hot, give several coats. Then 1 or more coats of vinegar, in 1/2 pint of which has been steeped 2 ounces steel filings or rusty nails. B. 1 gallon vinegar, 2 pounds extract of logwood, 1/2 pound green copperas, 1/4 pound china blue, 2 ounces nut galls. Boil in an iron pot till dissolved. Then add 1/2 pint iron solution made by steel filings and vinegar. C. 8 ounces gall apple, 3 ounces logwood extract, 2 ounces vitriol, 2 ounces verdigris, 1 gallon water, 1/2 pint iron solution. D. 1/2 pound logwood, 3 quarts water, 1 ounce pearl ash. Apply hot. Then take 1/2 pound logwood, boil in 2 quarts water, add 1/2 ounce each of verdigris and copperas, and 1/2 pint iron solution. These stains form a foundation only. The blackness is intensified by means of black filling in, and the use of Frankfurt black or gas black in the polish. E. A recipe used by furniture manufacturers. Logwood chips, 8 ounces, copperas, 1/2 ounce. Boil the logwood in 1 gallon of water for half an hour, and add the copperas. Apply hot, giving 2 or 3 coats. In varnishing ebonized wood, a little black must be added, or the varnish will give a brown shade. F. To impart to pine, or any similar wood, a perfectly jet black surface, either bright or dull, mix some black with ordinary glue size, and apply to the wood. The mixture acts both as filling and stain. If the grain rises, paper it down. When smoothing down any black wood, use a little linseed oil on the face of the glass paper. For the polishing medium, use white polish and gas black mixed, finishing off with clear polish without the black. But pine is not a good wood to ebonize. G. The French black stain is sold by most veneer merchants and gum merchants at 1 shilling per pint. It is not advisable to use it before polishing, as it contains free acid or salt, which is unfavorable for polishing and raises the grain. A suitable black stain for wood can be obtained at any oilman's. The ebony stains in general use are suitable for most woods. H. For very lustrous black, use black enamel upon a coating of flat black paint. A less brilliant surface would probably look the best, for which ebonize and then French polish. The following recipes apply to darkening or improving the appearance of inferior woods. Fumigation. This is the best method, though generally it is used only for oak and mahogany. Articles are given an appearance of age or enriched in color by shutting them up for a time in an airtight cupboard or box, on the bottom of which have in place dishes of liquor ammonia. 1/2 pint is generally sufficient for a box 9 feet long, 6 feet high, 3 feet 6 inches wide. It is a good plan to have a few squares of glass inserted, through which the action of the fumes can be watched. A well-made packing case will do, with strong brown paper pasted over the joints. This process will give shades varying from light olive to deep brown. Its chief advantage is that it does not raise the grain. To test whether any kind of wood can be darkened by fumigation, take a piece freshly planed up on one side, take the stopper out of the ammonia bottle, and lay the wood over the mouth. The vapor, of course, will be strong, and if the wood can be darkened, it will very soon show a patch of altered color. A small bit of wood will do, anything large enough to cover the bottle's mouth. On a larger scale, you can try by pouring some of the ammonia into a cup and covering the top in a similar way. For fumigation to be effective, it is, of course, necessary for the woodwork to be perfectly free from grease or marks of handling. Should you be unable to procure a case large enough to hold the wood, a small spare room may be made to serve the purpose if the precaution is taken to paste paper over any openings, such as the fireplace. Fumigated oak is generally finished by wax polishing, but there is no reason beyond custom why it may not be French polished or varnished. Some kinds of oak are not susceptible to ammonia vapor. It is not always convenient to adopt fumigation when a like result can be gained by other means. Aniline dyes are useful for staining in self-colors, and these are generally used for decorative purposes, such as inlays. Fancy furniture and knickknacks possess an individuality when thus treated, which is preferred to imitating any particular wood. The following recipes are in general use and apply to decorative and imitative treatment. Satin wood. 1 quart spirits, 3 ounces ground turmeric, 1½ ounce gamboge. Rich purple or chocolate. 1/2 pound madder, 1/4 pound fustic, 1/4 pound dragon's blood, 1 ounce common soda, dissolved in 3 pints of spirits. Purple. 1 pound logwood chips, 1/4 pound pearl ash, 2 ounces indigo, 3 quarts water. Boil the logwood till the full strength is gained. Apply hot or cold. Gray. Maple may be stained a green-gray color by using copperas in water or vinegar. Green. A verdigris dissolved in hot vinegar, or the crystals of verdigris in hot water. A little indigo may be added, and 2 or 3 applications may be necessary. The proportions may be varied to obtain the desired tint, but the aniline dyes, as sold in packets or tubes for a few pence, will be found to meet all requirements if only a small quantity, say a quart, is needed, especially if a little vinegar is added as directed. These dyes are often preferable, owing to the facilities for getting various shades. For instance, if the green is too bright, it is easy to add a little of the blue or black dye. It will be well to bear in mind that the hotter these stains are applied, the more deeply they will strike in. B. Sponge the wood over with a decoction of turmeric, followed by one of Prussian blue. Olive green. An olive green color, much in vogue in America for small tables, etc., is obtained by giving 2 coats of green stain and 1 of black, or the work might be stained green and a black filling in used. Blue. Indigo dissolved in dilute sulfuric acid, adding a little whiting to modify, or washing blue or china blue dissolved in vinegar. Brown. Van Dyke brown, 1/4 pound, a pennyworth of burnt sienna, and 1 pound of washing soda. Add 2 quarts of water and boil for 20 minutes. The stain costs only 6 pence for 2 quarts, is very strong, and will stain in imitation of light oak, dark oak, or walnut, according to the number of coats that are applied. Yellow. A great deal of the yellow finish on wood is obtained by staining and sizing at one operation. Yellow ochre or lemon chrome is mixed with the patent or glue size. This is applied warm with a brush, the surplus being wiped off with a piece of rag. When dry, rub smooth with fine glass paper, and finish with spirit or oil varnish. B. Mix raw sienna with water and dissolve a little size in this mixture. Then, with a piece of sponge, take a portion of size and sienna and rub it into the work to be stained until it is evenly coated, rubbing it nearly dry as you go. When dry, varnish with hard drying church oak varnish. C. Apply a decoction of cochineal in water, say 2 ounces powdered cochineal boiled in 1 3/4 pints of water for 2½ to 3 hours. When this is quite dry, go over the wood with a solution made up of 1 3/4 pints of water, in which 1 ounce of chloride of tin and 1/2 ounce of tartaric acid have been dissolved. D. Another stain is made of turmeric dissolved in hot water or in mentholated spirit. The color can be varied by increasing or decreasing the quantity of turmeric. E. Half an ounce of nitric acid diluted with 1½ ounces distilled or rainwater. This will turn the wood yellow. If too dark, add more water. F. The application of a decoction of yellow dyewood or a solution of picric acid or aniline yellow dissolved in varnish. G. Dissolve common washing soda in boiling water and add either yellow ochre or chrome yellow, whichever color is preferred. H. Barberry roots and twigs boiled in water will form a cheap yellow stain for wood when applied hot. Cherry. A. Mix together, by stirring, 1 quart of spirits of turpentine, 1 pint of varnish, and 1 pound of dry burnt sienna. Apply with a brush, and, after it has been on about 5 minutes, wipe it off with rags. This stain takes about 12 hours to dry. B. The following is a cheap cherry stain. Take 3 ounces of Bismarck brown and dissolve in 1 gallon of boiling water. Add 1 gill of vinegar to set the color and prevent fading, and place away until cold, when it will be ready for use. C. Another cherry stain is made by boiling 1 pound of Spanish annatto in 1 gallon of water, to which has been added 1 ounce of concentrated potash ley. Evaporation over a gentle heat will give darker shades. Many more recipes might be given, but any reader acquainted with the color scale will readily perceive that a vast range of color or tones can be gained by combination. Quantities are omitted in several cases for the simple reason that any convenient quantity can be used. If too strong, it is easy to add water, and it is worthwhile noting that curious effects are sometimes gained by spreading a stain of an entirely different color over another. For instance, fancy tables stained a bright green have sometimes an overglaze of black or blue. Whatever the color required, it is a good plan, and often saves much disappointment, if, before staining the work, a few similar pieces of wood are first experimented on, till the required result is attained, bearing in mind that 2 rather weak applications are more effective than 1 strong one. The coloring is more evenly distributed. Consequently, a patchy appearance is avoided. The practical French polisher does not aim at getting the exact tone by means of stains alone. He knows how far red oil, colored filling in, dyed polish and varnish, etc., will aid him. The importance of this fact cannot be too strongly impressed upon readers. It may save much vexation when endeavoring to gain a particular result by means of stains alone. In inlaid work, the veneers are usually so carefully selected as to render any staining unnecessary. If, however, it must be done, protect the inlay by first giving it 2 or 3 coats of thin, white, hard varnish. This must be carefully done by means of a camel hair pencil, allowing no varnish to spread on the portion to be stained. Then use any stain desired. When dry, do the polishing with white or transparent polish, taking no notice of the varnish on the inlays till the first body of polish is on. Should the varnish then stand up in ridges above the polished portion, it can be leveled by means of fine glass paper, on the face of which has been applied a little linseed oil. The process required to stain veneers right through is called dyeing, but when the article is made, and the surface of the veneer colored afterwards, the process is termed staining. For dyeing, it is advisable to soak the veneer at least half a day in clean water, then take it out and allow a few hours to drain before inserting in the dye bath. This will cause the dye to penetrate more readily and be more evenly distributed. For staining purposes, this is not necessary, as only the surface is acted upon. Previous to staining woodwork from which the paint has been removed by lime process, rub it down with glass paper, and coat the lime-burnt portion with vinegar, and when dry, give it a good coat of warm glue or patent size, which will make the surface non-absorbent. Mix equal parts of varnish and turps, and stain with burnt umber in oil to the desired color. For a more yellow color, use raw sienna for staining. Strain before using, and spread carefully and evenly, brushing the way of the grain. When dry, give another coating of stain if desirable, and finish with 1 or 2 coats of hard drying church oak varnish. Or, when the paint has been cleaned right off the wood by lime, after vinegaring, it can be stained with water stain. After this, 2 coats of size and 1 of varnish should be applied. Any paintbrush to suit the extent of surfaces will do, providing that it is quite free from dust or paint, and that the hairs don't come out in using. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing by Paul Hasluck. Processes of varnishing wood. An idea more or less prevalent among those who do not make the finishing of woods a business is that mahogany should generally be French polished, and that other hard woods should be either polished in wax or stained and varnished. These methods have their advantages, though they are not always the best to follow by those who desire to finish some piece of woodwork quickly and economically, and to produce a good result without much trouble. For such work, there is probably no better method than that of using shellac varnish. All ordinary articles, up to medium-priced furniture, may be finished in this way, provided that the wood is not mahogany, and even then it may be employed if the operator cannot manage French polishing. The advantage of using shellac for a foundation and finishing all kinds of wood, both soft and hard, is principally that it produces an extremely hard surface when dry. As it dries sufficiently hard in 5 or 6 hours to admit of sandpapering, the work may be done expeditiously. Moreover, shellac so effectually seals up the pores of the wood that when applied to the resinous timbers, it even prevents the exudation of resin. Some years ago, furniture polishers used shellac on open-grained woods without the filler, and this is done to some extent now, but experience has shown that the use of paste filler is economical both in time and material. To be successful in the use of spirit varnish, it is desirable that one should be somewhat acquainted with the method of French polishing, for this gives, to a great extent, the key to success. Unlike oil varnish, spirit varnish, as a rule, does not flow level after leaving the brush. The beautiful level surface of oil varnish, as seen on carriage bodies, is gained by allowing the first coat to get perfectly dry, and then rubbing it down smooth by means of pumice in lump or in powder before applying the next coat. The same principle underlies the successful use of spirit varnish. Each successive coat should be leveled by the aid of fine glass paper or the polish rubber, and it will further tend to success if, before any varnish is applied, the pores of the wood are sealed, either by the aid of a coat of size or by filling in and spreading over the work a few good rubbers full of polish. For small work, the latter plan is recommended. Its object is twofold. It prevents the absorption of varnish by the unclosed pores of the wood and keeps down the grain, which otherwise is apt to rise if no precautionary measures are taken. A custom is now gaining in public favor of finishing many of the small knickknacks and fancy articles of furniture with enamel paints, in preference to polishing or varnishing. This enameling has much to recommend it, for apart from the pleasing variety thus gained by the use of artistic colors, and the fact that the articles can be made out of commoner, and consequently cheaper, woods, the enamel is easy of application, thus rendering it of service alike in the finishing of new goods and the renovation of old goods, in many cases giving the latter a new lease of life. The foundation of some of these enamels is spirit varnish, carefully mixed and blended with some dry pigment of the required shade. Before their use, it is advisable to give new work a coat of size, but no other preparation is needed, not even leveling down by means of the polish rubber. Moreover, some goods may be given a pleasing finish by thinning out the last coat by the addition of a little methylated spirit or linseed oil, which will give a semi-lustrous or eggshell finish that does not show up the inequalities of the woodwork to such a prominence as a bright finish would. Brushes for applying spirit varnish, whether clear or in the form of enamels, should be camel hair, of the kind known as gilder's mops, Figure 11. These are strongly recommended, as the majority are far superior to those inserted in wood handles, whether round or flat. Those in tin should also be avoided unless they can be washed out in methylated spirit and put aside when not in use. For domestic purposes, the varnish should be kept in a large-mouthed glass bottle, with the brush suspended from the cork, Figure 12. This keeps it always at hand and in fit condition. Glass or earthenware jars only should be used. Varnish containing shellac has a sort of corrosive action on tin, causing the varnish to turn dark-colored and to smell disagreeably. When only a small quantity of varnish is required, it is probable that the cost of gums, etc., would really cause it to be too expensive to make. Those who make a speciality of varnish making have the pick of the market, coupled with an extensive experience of the nature of the materials and requirements of their customers, and they can turn out a superior varnish, and in most cases can sell it at less cost than it can be made at home. Manufacturers claim that varnish should be used just as it is sold. While it is true that it is a mistake to add anything to the finer grades of varnish, the poor qualities are often too thick to work freely without diluting. If, therefore, it is necessary, add turpentine until the varnish spreads freely with a fitch. After varnishing, the work should be laid aside for at least 24 hours, by which time the coat will be hard, although if too much varnish has been used, it will be necessary to give the work more time before applying the next coat. A coat of varnish over one that is not perfectly hard will almost invariably result in sweating, which will necessitate scraping the work and recommencing the job from the beginning, although if the sweating is only of a mild nature, an application of pumice stone and water may remove it. There are two varieties of shellac gum, orange and white. They may be bought dissolved in spirits of wine and ready for use, and also dry in the shell-like lacs. If purchased in the lac, to prepare for use, dissolve 2½ pounds of the white or 2 pounds of the orange shellac in 1/2 gallon of spirits of wine. The white shellac costs more than the orange, but it produces a cleaner and neater job when it is desired to give a light finish. It is used for making transparent polish and varnish, such as that used on light-colored goods and inlays. When bought, it is not in flakes like the orange, but it is in the form of white twisted sticks, and being kept in stock under water, it will naturally be damp. Therefore, take the precaution to crush the gum well, and spread it out in a warm room to dry before adding the spirits. If the shellac solution becomes too thick in consequence of the evaporation of the spirit, it may be reduced to the required consistency by adding more and agitating the mixture, preferably in a warm place. Sometimes methylated spirit is used instead of pure alcohol, but the smell is so objectionable to those that work with it that it is not generally used in first-class work. The components of varnish vary, and the price obtainable for the job, whether common or best work, is an important factor in determining the quality. Shellac generally forms the basis, and little else in the way of materials can be used when really good work has to be done. The addition of 2 ounces of resin to a pint of French polish makes a varnish that will suit for common work. The addition of gum benzoin instead of resin will suit for best work. Varnish should always be applied in a warm room free from dust. Varnished work is greatly improved by the leveling down process previously mentioned. For this process, the polish rubber is required to be soft and pliable, with rag covering, and a flat face free from creases. When a coat of varnish is half dry, say in 10 minutes, Rub lightly in the way usual when French polishing, with the rubber charged with half polish and half spirits, adding more spirits as required. It will further tend to improve if, when rubbing down the last coat, a few drops of glaze are added to the rubber. When stained and thoroughly dry, the work is in a condition to receive the first coat of varnish. It is of importance that the work shall be in a perfectly dry condition, and this can readily be ascertained by noticing the uniformly dead appearance it presents, especially at the corners and angles. All woods may have shellac for a first coat of varnish. Birch, maple, and poplar may readily be stained to imitate cherry, and require no filling, but oak, ash, walnut, etc., are best treated with a filler to close the pores of the wood. When all the filler has been thoroughly removed, clean the work down with cotton waste, and it is then ready to receive the first coat of shellac. Where filling is not used, the shellac is applied after the work is sandpapered and stained. The application of the shellac is often difficult to the beginner, although to the experienced hand it is perhaps the most pleasant part of the job, because its results are always the same. The object is to apply the shellac uniformly over the surface, and this to an inexperienced hand is not easy, because the spirit evaporates quickly, and he is likely to go over the same ground twice, producing objectionable lapse and unevenness. If the work consists of paneling, the panels should be done first, and the stiles and rails afterwards, finishing with the moldings. The size of brushes used will depend upon the class of work under treatment, but comparatively small brushes will answer best in most cases. It is of importance to remember that the shellac must always be laid on with the grain of the wood, and when the brush is handled quickly and in a workmanlike manner, the difficulties will not be great. It should also be borne in mind that the warmer a room is, the quicker will the spirits evaporate and the coating of shellac harden. After the coat of shellac has been on, say, 6 hours, it should be glass papered to render the surface perfectly level. Use a thin glass paper of a fine grade. Divide a sheet into 4 equal parts, and place the ends of a piece over the little finger and thumb. Rub fairly hard, but go very lightly over edges and moldings, taking care not to cut through the varnish on protruding parts and edges. To reach corners, fold a piece of glass paper into a triangle, moistening the paper if necessary. New glass paper often scratches unevenly, and it is advisable to rub 2 pieces together to remove grit. Horsehair cloth may be used in very fine work instead of glass paper. This can be obtained at any furniture repairing shop. Old cloth answers, and the hair side is used. Having been thoroughly dusted off, the work is now ready for a second coat of shellac. This will be applied exactly in the same way as the first, and then, after glass papering, it will be ready to receive the first coat of varnish. The varnishing done on this foundation may be of any quality, from cheap one-coat work up to a piano finish. If one coat only is to be used, a varnish should be employed that will dry with a good gloss. As a rule, 2 coats of varnish will be required, and the method of application will probably be the same whatever number of coats are given. To apply varnish properly requires a good deal of practice, and it is impossible to lay down rules that shall govern the process. The inexperienced almost invariably apply too much varnish, the inevitable result being that the work cracks, an effect that destroys all pretensions to a good job. The following are given merely as hints. Dip the brush well into the varnish and lay it on across the grain, commencing at the least exposed portions of the work, so that, in case it has to be handled, the more prominent parts may not be marred. The varnish can should be provided with a wire or bar soldered across the middle of the mouth. Dip the brush as may be required, wipe it off on this bar, and lay off on the work as before. Stab the brush well into angles and corners. When the whole surface has been roughly covered, wipe the brush again on the bar, removing all the varnish possible. Then lay off the work with the grain of the wood. Draw the brush backwards and forwards, and wipe it again as necessary. Repeat this operation until a perfectly level surface is obtained. If there are grooves or depressions in the work, they will retain more varnish than the plain surface, and to prevent the surplus running down, the brush must be stabbed in and drawn out toward the main surface. It will be understood that the last coat of varnish introduced will make a very good job if the underneath coats of varnish and shellac, respectively, have been treated carefully in the manner described. The process of rubbing down with pumice stone is only applied when an extra fine finish is required, and in that case, after the surface has been cleaned off, the final operation of cleaning the work is proceeded with. Dip a small paintbrush in rubbing oil thinned down with either petroleum or benzene. The finest grades obtainable should be used, and lightly paint over any moldings, carvings, etc. Then go over the surface with a small cotton rag dipped in the oil, and rub off all with a dry rag, using also a clean brush to clean out the oil from the lines, carvings, etc., and take care that all the oil is removed. Then take a soft rag, moistened with alcohol, and go lightly over the whole work. As varnish will dissolve in alcohol, care must be taken to do this very lightly and quickly. Where a fine finish is required, the best results are obtained by rubbing down each successive coat of varnish as it dries, and in that case, a varnish that admits of rubbing must be used. When the first coat is thoroughly hard, take a piece of haircloth or worn sandpaper and lightly rub down the surface. Rub with the grain of the wood, and take care not to tear the varnish nor wear it through. Then clean the surface off thoroughly with the dusting brush, and proceed to the second coat. Apply the second somewhat more heavily than the first coat, but take great care not to work up the undercoat. The second coat will require 30 hours before a third is applied. If more than 3 coats are to be given, the thickness of each coat must be reduced accordingly. Between each coat of varnish, a rubbing should be given as described, and for the best class of work, the final coat may also be rubbed, but in a different manner. For this purpose, a cotton or woolen rag is used, or a piece of felt. This is dipped into finely powdered pumice stone, and the rubbing is done lightly backwards and forwards with the grain of the wood. The most convenient plan is to keep the powdered pumice stone in a small can or saucer with water added, and to pass the hand over the work during its progress to ascertain whether the surface is perfectly smooth. Finally, the surface is thoroughly cleaned off with sponge and water, and then well rubbed down with a chamois leather. Some classes of work need the final coats of varnish to be polished. This is done as follows. Take a little powdered rotten stone on a damp rag, and rub the work lightly with the palm of the hand backwards and forwards, adding a little water if necessary, continuing the rubbing until the surface is quite dry. The varnish will present a very lustrous appearance, and then the work may be cleaned off with petroleum. Drop ivory black may be used with advantage instead of rotten stone. The work is often polished with the following wash, or its equivalent: raw linseed oil, 1 quart, vinegar, 1 pint, alcohol, 1 pint, liquor ammonia, 1/4 pint. Spirit varnishes are the only ones which properly admit of being colored. Often the resins themselves will give the varnish a natural tint of yellow, brown, or red. In fact, pure colorless resin varnishes are only obtainable by carefully selecting the materials for solutions, or by subjecting them to preliminary bleaching. Of the resins which are most frequently used to color varnishes, dragon's blood and gamboge are the principal. Dyewood extracts also play a considerable part in the coloring of varnishes, and aniline dyes are still more largely used. When shellac varnishes are intended to be colored with aniline, bleached lac only should be employed. The aniline color dissolved in alcohol is added to the varnish after the latter has been prepared, and the product should be warmed if necessary to expel any excess of alcohol introduced with the aniline. Picric acid gives a beautiful yellow color, which may be turned into a fine green by the addition of iodine green. The 2 coloring materials in this case should be added as separate solutions. A good blue color may be obtained with prussiate of iron, free from alumina, and a green with acetate of copper. A mixture of prussiate of iron with gamboge gives several good shades of green, and with carmine or dragon's blood, a violet. Colored varnishes should be applied very quickly in order to give a uniform tint. For application to polished surfaces, such as glass, wood, china, or metal, the addition of 0.5% of borax is an advantage. Where varnishes and lacquers are required to be made by the aid of heat, or where large quantities are wanted, special plant and arrangements are necessary. but these cannot be treated of here. The following remarks apply to those varnishes and lacquers which can be made without the aid of heat, and where the quantity to be made at a time does not exceed the requirements of a moderate consumption. In making varnishes and lacquers of all kinds, care should be taken in every case to see that the spirit is of full strength, the resins free from moisture and all foreign matter, and where the finer sorts of varnishes are to be made, to see also that the resins are all picked. The resins should be small, and, if possible, coarsely powdered, as large pieces take a long time to dissolve, while small pieces or powder get into a cohesive mass, in which state it is almost impossible to effect solution. To effect speedy solution of the resins, various plans are resorted to, such as constant agitation, with occasional immersion in hot water when the varnish or lacquers be made in small quantity in a glass bottle, or by rolling jars or tins when the varnish is being made in quantities of 2 or 3 gallons, or by using casks turned by mechanical means where the required quantity is larger still. It may be convenient in the case of turpentine varnishes, which do not evaporate so quickly, to make them in wide-mouthed jars, and simply stir them frequently with a stick. If the stirring rod in this case is provided with crossbars like the prongs of a dinner fork, the mass is more effectively broken up, and the solution consequently hastened. It is almost unnecessary to say that the utmost care and cleanliness should be exercised in the making of varnishes, as the least dust or moisture will affect their quality. It may be difficult to get methylated spirit of a strength ranging from 90 to 95%, and pure alcohol is very expensive, so it may be well here to point out a ready plan for rectifying commercial methylated spirit in small quantity. Take a large bladder, which has been thoroughly freed from all fatty tissue both internally and externally, and fill it with methylated spirit 60 over proof, and hang it in a warm place. The water will ooze through the bladder, and the spirit left inside will be correspondingly strengthened. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Wood Finishing, comprising staining, varnishing, and polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, comprising staining, varnishing, and polishing, by Paul Hasluck. Varnishes. Spirit varnishes are classified into groups as follows: A. Alcohol and sandarac. B. Alcohol and mastic. C. Alcohol and copal. D. Alcohol and amber. E. Alcohol and shellac. F. Alcohol and mixed resins. These varnishes are very quick drying, only less so than ether varnishes. They may be made to vary greatly in quality by the addition of essential oils, and are mostly colorless or only very slightly colored. The addition of essential oils renders the varnishes more durable and elastic, and less likely to crack through exposure to the air. These varnishes are largely employed in the bookmaking, leather, and paper trades, and for certain kinds of metalwork, as well as for wood varnishes. In addition to sandarac, mastic, copal, amber, and shellac, other resins such as anime, alumi, benzoin, gamboge, and dragon's blood are frequently used in the preparation of these varnishes, the latter two especially as colorants, and camphor also is frequently incorporated. Varnishes composed of spirit and shellac are among the oldest. Their natural red and yellow tints caused these preparations to become popular with furniture makers, and the introduction of bleached shellac completed the requirements of the trade by supplying a colorless preparation. Though shellac cannot be altogether dissolved in the spirits employed, yet a perfectly clear solution may generally be obtained by adding a little powdered lime and allowing it to settle. It then separates into 2 layers, the upper one, about 3/4 of the whole, being perfectly clear, and of the cloudy residue, a part may also be rendered fit for use by filtration. A little petroleum or benzene may be used for clearing the solution, but in that case the cloudy layer rises to the surface, and none of it is recoverable by filtration. Shellac may be dissolved with borax if 3 parts of shellac and 1 of borax are added to 25 parts of water, and the whole is moderately heated. The solution thus obtained is in itself an excellent varnish. It may be incorporated with oil colors by rubbing out these with a little oil and then mixing with the varnish. The mixture dries within 10 or 15 minutes and should be prepared only as required. Brown spirit varnish is made of shellac, 2 pounds, gum sandarac, 1/2 pound, methylated spirit, 60 over proof, 1 gallon. Shake until the gums are dissolved, and add warmed Venice turpentine, 3/4 pound. Shake until thoroughly mixed, and afterwards strain. It should be kept for a week or 10 days previous to use. Another spirit varnish is made of 4 ounces shellac, 2 ounces resin, 1/2 ounce gum benzoin, 1/2 ounce gum, thus 1 pint methylated spirits. Crush the gums, pour in the spirits, and set aside in a warm place, frequently shaking the bottle. Carefully strain before using, and apply with a camel hair brush. White furniture varnish is made of bleached shellac, powdered, 2 ounces, spirit, 1 pint. Dissolve the shellac in about 2/3 of the spirit, filter, then add first 1/3 of the remaining spirit, and afterwards dilute with the remainder. A reddish varnish may be made in the same manner by using orange instead of bleached lac, and a still darker one by the use of very dark lac, with the addition of a little extract of sandalwood. Black varnish is made of thin orange shellac, 3 ounces, spirit, 1 pint, Venice turpentine, previously liquefied, 3/4 ounce. Dissolve on water bath, then add about 1/2 ounce lamp black. Dark varnish is made of thin orange shellac, 3 ounces, Venice turpentine, 1/2 ounce, spirit, 1 pint. Dissolve the lac and turpentine in the alcohol on the water bath. The best white hard spirit varnish is made of fine picked gum sandarac, 2 pounds. Dissolve in methylated spirit, 1 gallon. Strain and add finest pale turpentine varnish, 1 pound. Another dearer kind is made of gum mastic, 2 1/4 pounds. Stronger spirit, 1 gallon. Dissolve and add 1 pound finest pale turpentine varnish. Ether varnishes are classified into groups as follows: A. With pure ether basis, B. With mixed basis, C. With resin, chloroform, and benzene basis. These varnishes are generally of an exceedingly fluid character. They dry quickly, but they are not durable, and their application is therefore limited to objects which are not exposed to frequent cleaning or rubbing. The volatility of the solvents renders it necessary to keep ether varnishes in vessels very carefully closed. It is an advantage to give the articles to which these varnishes are to be applied a preliminary rubbing with oil of lavender or rosemary, after which they should be allowed to dry well before varnishing. The following is a recipe for an ether varnish. Take of finely powdered copal, 3½ ounces, ether, specific gravity, 0.725, 1 pint. Dissolve the copal in the ether in a stoppered bottle, constantly shaking. If the copal is not entirely dissolved, add a little more ether. Allow the solution to stand and settle, then decant into another bottle and keep carefully stoppered. A more quickly drying varnish, especially suitable for small wooden articles, maps, etc., may be made by dissolving as explained above. Finely powdered soft damar, 5 ounces, in ether, specific gravity, 0.725, 1 pint. A good varnish having a mixed ether solvent is made as follows: powdered mastic, sandarac, and glass, of each 2 ounces. Ether, specific gravity, 0.725, 1/4 pint. Alcohol, 1/2 pint. Lavender oil, 2 ounces. Mix the alcohol and the ether, and then add the resins and glass. Shake in stoppered bottle, allow to settle, and decant. The lavender to be added afterwards. Another method of making ether varnishes is as follows: select the palest lumps of copal gum, crush them into small pieces, and tie in a bag of fine muslin. Suspend this in a bottle of sulphuric ether, and the copal gum will gradually ooze out into the ether. When the gum has been digested, let the bag drain, and then be put into another bottle of ether, which will dissolve all the available gum. Plenty of the gum should be used, so that the liquid will form a thick varnish. To make the varnish dry more slowly and render it more elastic, add any slow-drying essential oil, as oil of caraway, oil of anise, poppy, or sweet almonds. These oils are colorless in small quantities. Should it dry too slowly, add more ether and mix thoroughly. Varnish for gilded wood is made of sandarac, 1½ ounces, mastic and tears, 1½ ounces, alumi, 1 ounce, spirit, 1 pint. The powdered resins are placed in a still with the alcohol and boiled for 2 hours. The product of distillation, about 1/2 pint, is collected. 1/3 of this is replaced in the still and boiled for 2 hours more. After this, the remaining 2/3 are placed in the still and similarly treated. The varnish thus obtained is very useful for protecting gilding and allows the articles treated with it to be washed without injurious effect. The following are some useful formulae of other varnishes for the same purpose made of powdered resins, dissolved in alcohol heated on a water bath, turpentine being added if necessary. 1. Mastic and tears, 3 ounces, sandarac, 2 ounces, spirit, 1 pint. 2. Mastic and tears, 1½ ounces, sandarac, 1½ ounces, shellac, 1 ounce, colophony, 1 ounce, spirit, 1 pint. A very hard and slow-drying varnish is made of mastic and tears, 2 ounces, sandarac, 2 ounces, copal, 1 ounce, spirit, 1 pint, spike oil, 1½ ounces. All these ingredients may be more or less varied. The varnishes may be perfumed with a few drops of any aromatic balsam. Amber varnishes are usually prepared by first fusing the amber, then adding the other resins, next pouring the clarified linseed oil on the dissolved mass, and then diluting it with turpentine. Another way is to allow the amber to cool after dissolving, and to repowder it and dissolve in the water bath, together with the other resins in the oils. By exposing amber varnish to the sunlight, the quality is improved. Sandarac varnish is used for articles subject to friction and hard use, and may be applied to wood and even metals. The following formulae will be found useful. 1. Gum sandarac, 8 ounces, pounded mastic, 2 ounces, alcohol, 1 quart, turpentine, 4 ounces, pounded glass, 4 ounces. Mix and dissolve with frequent agitation. 2. Pounded copal of an amber color once liquefied, 3 ounces, gum sandarac, 6 ounces, mastic cleaned, 3 ounces, clear turpentine, 2½ ounces, pounded glass, 4 ounces, pure alcohol, 1 quart. Mix and dissolve with frequent agitation. Bright varnish for toys and small wooden articles is made as follows: sandarac, 3 ounces, copal, 1½ ounce, mastic, 1½ ounce, best turpentine, 1/4 pint, powdered glass, 2 ounces, spirit, 1 pint. Dissolve on water bath. A more durable bright varnish, for articles which have to stand wear, is prepared by dissolving on a water bath. Picked sandarac, 4½ ounces, mastic and tears, 1 ounce, powdered glass, 2 ounces, spirit, 1 pint. The varnish may be rendered more fluid by the addition of 8 ounces of liquid Venice turpentine, after which it should be filtered. A very bright and quickly drying varnish is made of sandarac, 1¾ ounce, mastic and tears, 1¾ ounce, copal, 1 ounce, oil of lavender, 1 ounce, spirit, 1 pint. Slightly damp the copal with oil of lavender, and melt it in a well-glazed vessel on a slow fire. Then run on a cold marble slab and powder. Add this powder to the powdered sandarac and mastic, and dissolve on a water bath in the alcohol. After solution, add the lavender oil under stirring. Perfumed varnishes are sometimes used, especially for imitation Chinese and Oriental articles. The following are formulae for such preparations: dissolve on the water bath powdered 1 pound sticklac, 1/4 pound of picked benzoin, 1/4 pound of storax, and 1/2 pound of sandarac in 5 pints of spirit. Or prepare in the same way: shellac 9 ounces, mastic and tears 4½ ounces, picked benzoin 2¼ ounces, sandarac 4½ ounces, alumi 1/2 ounce, myrrh 1/2 ounce, amber 1/2 ounce, with 3 pints of spirit, and afterward add, under stirring, 1/2 ounce of copaiba balsam, and filter. Sealing wax varnish for coating corks, etc., is made of good red sealing wax 3 pounds, shellac 1 pound, dissolved by agitation in 1 gallon methylated spirit. Black varnish may be made in the same way, and using the same proportions, substituting black for red sealing wax. Colorless varnish is made by dissolving with gentle heat 8 ounces gum sandarac and 2 ounces Venice turpentine in 32 ounces alcohol. A harder varnish of a reddish tint is made by using 5 ounces shellac and 1 ounce turpentine dissolved in 32 ounces alcohol. White varnish for maps, etc., is made of Canada balsam dissolved with a little less Venice turpentine and then strained. Clear varnishes are made as follows, the parts being taken by weight: 1. Linseed oil 50 parts, white lead 2 parts, litharge 2 parts, umber 1 part. Add a little vermilion. 2. Linseed oil 100 parts, water 50 parts, litharge 10 parts, neutral acetate of lead 1 part. Boil 6 or 7 hours. Essential oil varnishes are classified into groups as follows: A. Turpentine and mastic. B. Turpentine and sandarac. C. Turpentine and copal. D. Turpentine and damar. E. Turpentine and various resins or mordants. F. Mixed essential oils and resin. These differ in many important particulars from other classes of varnishes. The solvent does not entirely disappear during the drying processes of the varnish, but becomes incorporated in the hard surface layer. In practice, the only essential oils used are turpentine, lavender, and rosemary, the two latter only in a minor degree. Turpentine, to be used in varnish making, should always be well rectified and absolutely colorless. The boiling point of the oil is 160 degrees centigrade, so the manufacture of varnishes in which it forms an ingredient cannot be carried on at a very high temperature. Essential oil varnishes are notable for their fluidity, their brilliancy, and the quickness with which they dry. Turpentine is, by far, the best vehicle for dissolving resins. The incorporation of a fatty oil into a turpentine varnish causes it to dry more slowly, while it increases the hardness. Varnishes made with essential oil only are used almost exclusively for indoor work and house painting, and for coating articles not exposed to the open air, or which do not require much handling or cleaning. Varnishes made with a mixture of essential and fixed oils are mostly employed for outdoor work or other purposes where there is generally much wear and friction. In preparing this class of varnishes, the resins may be dissolved in cold oil, but, as this is a slow process, they are generally dissolved separately under the influence of heat and should be allowed to cool. The oil is then added slowly, constantly stirring. The mixture is left to settle and then filtered. Vat varnishes are slower in drying than many others, but they are the most durable and hardest of any. They are almost always used for outdoor and other work requiring hard wear. In fat varnishes, almost all resins used in varnish making can be incorporated, but copal and amber are those generally used. The choice of the oil used as a solvent is of prime importance. It should have been extracted from properly matured seed, cold-drawn oil being generally better than that obtained by heat. It should be thoroughly purified, limpid, of a pale color, and free from pungent odor. It is an advantage to use oil which has had time to settle properly, and has been carefully drawn from the receptacles in which it was stored. Fat oil varnishes are classified in groups as follows: A. Fixed oils and lead or zinc salts. B. Fixed oils and manganese salts. C. Fixed oils and acids. D. Fixed oils and copal. E. Fixed oils and amber. F. Composite fixed oil varnishes. Linseed oil is the principal fatty oil employed in the manufacture of oil varnishes. Varnish prepared with it as the base color should be as clear as water, of a pale straw color, and of about 0.9575 specific gravity. It should, in drying, produce an even, colorless, and translucent coat. To cause the oil to dry, it must be treated with metallic salts, preferably of lead, tin, or zinc. The metals are usually first granulated, zinc being used in the form of the sulfate of commerce, and should be calcined before use. The boiling of the metallic salts with the oil is done in a copper vessel in the proportion of 31 parts of oil to 1 each of tin and lead, and is continued until the salts are completely dissolved. The boiler is then taken from the fire, and 2 parts of calcined and powdered zinc are added under vigorous stirring, producing effervescence. When this has subsided, the mixture is again boiled for about half an hour until bubbles cease. The varnish is then left to settle, and after 24 hours should be filtered through cloth. It is then bottled in vessels secured by a stopper sealed with lead and exposed to the sun for 7 or 8 days to render it limpid. Litharge, minium, and white lead are also often used as oil dryers, either combined or separately. The boiling is done on a naked fire or on the water bath. Before boiling, a volume of water equal to that of the oil should be added to it to diminish the risk of taking fire. The metallic salt should, in this case, be placed in a copper wire receptacle suspended in the upper layer of the liquid. The ordinary water bath does not give a sufficiently high temperature for boiling the oil, but by using water saturated with sulfate of lime, its boiling point may be raised. Take by weight: linseed oil, 30 parts, water, 12 parts, litharge, 3 parts, white lead, 2 parts, umber, 1 part. Place the minerals in a cloth bag, suspend them in the oil, and boil until the water is diminished by 1/8 of its volume. Or take linseed oil, 100 parts, litharge, 9 parts, white lead, 7 parts, umber, 2 parts. Mix the litharge with the oil, then add the umber and white lead by degrees when the oil begins to boil. Continue to boil for 3 or 4 hours. The following tests for ascertaining the purity or otherwise of linseed oil have been collected. 1. Pure oil at 15 degrees centigrade, 59 degrees Fahrenheit, has a specific gravity ranging between 0.935 and 0.932. Fish oil has a specific gravity almost the same. 2. Pure oil, boiled or raw, flashes at 244 degrees centigrade, 470 degrees Fahrenheit. Other fatty oils flash at about the same temperature. Resin oil flashes at between 149 and 165 degrees centigrade, 300 and 330 degrees Fahrenheit. The mineral oils used as adulterants flash at from 193 degrees to 215 degrees centigrade, 380 degrees to 420 degrees Fahrenheit. 3. When equal parts of linseed oil and nitric acid are put into a small white glass bottle and shaken up, the mixture will appear, after standing for 15 minutes or so, when the oil used is pure linseed, as an upper layer of muddy olive green, and a lower one almost colorless. When fish oil is present, the upper layer will be a deep red-brown, and the lower layer a deep blood red. 4. Shaken up with soda, and then having some warm water added, if any petroleum is present, it will separate from the emulsion. 5. When put in a bottle and buried in a mixture of ice and salt, cottonseed oil will solidify. Pure linseed oil remains liquid till 17 degrees Fahrenheit is reached. Varnish for musical instruments must be extremely pliable, and it must adhere to the wood without cracking and without thickening in crevices, thus forming an obstacle to the proper use of the instrument. For this reason, shellac and oily bodies are inadmissible. Varnishes for musical instruments are generally colored red or yellow, but the coloring materials should not in this case be prepared by the usual method of alcoholic solution, but by distilling the varnish on a water bath at a temperature of about 100 degrees centigrade, in which case the alcohol evaporates, its point of distillation being about 78 degrees, while the essential oil remains behind. The following are suitable recipes. 1. Sandarac, 1½ ounces. Mastic and tears, 2 ounces. Elemi, 1/2 ounce. Turpentine, 1/2 ounce. Castor oil, 1/2 ounce. Spirit, 1 ounce. 2. Mastic and tears, 1/4 ounce. Soft white damar, 1/8 ounce. Turpentine, 2 ounces. Raw linseed oil, 1/8 ounce. Put the turpentine in a broad bottom bottle with a small quantity of powdered glass, and add the mastic. Stir frequently, and after 24 hours add the damar. Leave to stand for another 24 hours, and then add the linseed oil while stirring. Let the mixture stand for a fortnight in strong light, then filter through cotton. This varnish improves with age, and is best when 6 or 8 months old. Varnishes, in which the solvent consists of a mixture of an essential oil and linseed oil, do not dry so quickly as pure turpentine varnishes, but they are much harder and more durable, and are largely used for outside work by carriage builders, etc. Shellac, by reason of its insolubility in fixed oil, is rarely employed in these varnishes, its place being generally taken by copal or amber. The following are some recipes for varnishes of this class. Varnish for distempering paint. Dissolve on the water bath with a little turpentine. Powdered mastic, 1/2 ounce. Powdered white olibanum, 1 ounce. Add to the mixture while hot. Venice turpentine, 1 ounce. Plain oil varnish, 1/2 ounce. Turpentine, 1 pint. Carriage varnish. Hard copal, 5 ounces. Plain oil varnish, 1 pint. Turpentine, 1 pint. Varnishes which consist of all these preparations, which include beeswax, and which are used as furniture polishes, are fully treated upon in Chapter 6. The dulling or blooming which sometimes mars the appearance of a varnished surface is caused by the presence of water. Gelatine is insoluble in spirit, and a thin sheet of gelatine cut in strips and put in the varnish will absorb the water and make the varnish as good as ever, so that it can be used clear and bright to the last drop. When the strips of gelatine become quite soft, through absorbing the moisture, they may be taken out and dried, and are then ready for use again. To refine shellac, 1½ pounds of soda are dissolved in 45 pounds of water in a suitable boiler. Add to this gradually, as it dissolves, 5 pounds of shellac. This forms a solution of violet red color, with more or less trace of fatty substances. After complete solution, the mixture is boiled for a few minutes, and the boiler is then covered with a wooden top, which is cemented down, and the contents of the boiler are cooled slowly. When cold, the grease on the surface of the solution is skimmed off, and, by means of sulfuric acid, added drop by drop, the shellac is precipitated, and well washed with water until all acid reaction is removed. The shellac is then put into boiling water and softened so that it may be worked into rods or plates, and is hardened by transferring it to cold water containing some glycerin. The refined shellac should have a silver to a yellowish-white surface, with a yellowish-brown fracture. It should be perfectly dry and entirely soluble in alcohol. The turbidity of alcoholic solutions of shellac is caused by a fatty substance present to the extent of 1 to 5%. To remove this, add 1 part of powdered chalk and heat to 112 degrees Fahrenheit. The greater portion of the solution clears rapidly, and the remainder may be clarified by filtering once. Spirit and copal varnishes should be prepared with pieces of transparent copal as nearly as possible of the same tint. Gum copal, although difficult of solution in lumps, has the property of liquefying when reduced to very fine powder and kept exposed to a current of air. There is a great variety of copals, but for general purposes they may be divided into hard, half-hard, and soft copals. The preparation of copal varnishes was formerly a difficult and arduous work, no easy process being known for completely dissolving the copal. But these difficulties have been overcome by the system of dissolving it on the water bath at a temperature of about 100 degrees, in as much spirit as is required to give the necessary fluidity to the varnish, or by that of treating both the resin and the solvent in a closed vessel at a temperature of about 300 degrees. Half soft copal contains more moisture than the hard resin and dissolves quicker. If overheated, it may turn black and be spoilt altogether. Care should also be taken to dilute it with turpentine as soon as the oil has been incorporated. The following makes a useful varnish: half soft copal, 1 1/4 pounds, boiled linseed oil, 1/4 to 1/2 pint, turpentine, 1 gallon. For quick drying copal varnish, the following are 2 formulae: 1. Turpentine, 1 pint, spirit, 1/2 pint. Mix, and whilst slowly stirring, add powdered copal, 4 ounces. Dissolve at about 100 degrees on the water bath, leave to settle, and decant. 2. Powdered copal, 18 ounces, turpentine, 3 pints, copaiba balsam, 3 ounces, spirit, 1 pint. Prepare in the same manner. Fat copal varnish requires a good deal of skill in its preparation, especially in the manipulation of the copal solution, which is easily spoilt by insufficient or excessive heat. Great care should be taken to select copal of the same color and the same degree of hardness. The oil should be added to the copal as soon as most of the largest pieces have been dissolved. Exceptionally hard pieces, which may remain undissolved, should be taken out and collected to make a special solution. The oil, before being poured onto the copal, should be heated to about the same temperature, but it must not be added in a boiling state. The following proportions are usual: hard or half soft copal, 1 part, oil, 9 parts, turpentine, slightly over 2 parts. The oil should be added slowly. To incorporate itself properly with the copal, it should be between 120 degrees and 150 degrees. If too hot, effervescence will take place. If too cold, it will form a cakey varnish. Copal varnishes are also made by the cold process, but the solution of copal in essential oil generally offers certain difficulties, especially when heat is used. The following process seems well adapted for obtaining copal varnish without the use of heat. Reduce the copal to powder, and then add gradually the spike oil or other essential oil solvent, beating up the two vigorously in a mixture. Gradually the copal dissolves, and the solution may be filtered. If turpentine is afterwards added to copal dissolved in the cold whey and spike oil, the copal is precipitated, which does not occur if solution has been affected by the aid of heat. A mixture of 1 part of spike oil to 9 parts of turpentine may be added to the copal without causing precipitation, and will produce a good varnish. By mixing powdered copal with spike oil, and then mixing linseed oil with the product, a uniform mixture is also obtainable. Damar resin is rather more soluble than copal in essential oil, but in using this, or any kind of soft resin, it should either be dissolved over a naked fire previous to being mixed with the solvent, or the latter should be added boiling. This is done because soft resins contain a considerable proportion of water, and, unless previously dried, are apt to spoil the varnish. Take powdered damar, 3/4 pound, and form a thick solution with about 1/2 pint of turpentine. Put the mixture on the fire, and, when it commences to boil, remove from the fire, and, under constant stirring, add 1/4 to 1/2 pint of turpentine. Bring the mixture on the fire again, and heat to the boiling point. Then withdraw, allow to stand, and filter. The addition of about 1/4 ounce of camphor will facilitate the solution. Hard copal varnish is made by dissolving on a naked fire 4 ounces of hard copal, and adding slowly fully 1 pint of oil heated to 150 degrees. Then add about 1 1/4 pint of turpentine, filter, and keep in closed vessels. The addition of oil of rosemary during the heating of the copal will give a colorless varnish at a comparatively low temperature. Hard copal, 1 ounce, rosemary oil, 1/4 ounce, linseed oil, 1/4 pint, turpentine, 1/4 pint. The linseed oil may be replaced by copaiba balsam, thus: dissolve 3 ounces of hard copal, add 1 ounce of heated copaiba, Dilute with 1 pint of turpentine. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Wood Finishing, comprising staining, varnishing, and polishing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Robert Fisher. Wood Finishing, comprising staining, varnishing, and polishing, by Paul Hasluck. Repolishing shop fronts. It is assumed that only those who have some knowledge of the craft and skill in manipulations will care to undertake the job of repolishing a shop front, which is so freely exposed to the criticism of every passer-by. It is not necessary to enter into general details, as these have been already dealt with. A grain filler need not be used on work that has been previously polished. The polished rubber should be kept soft and pliable, to enable it to get into the quirks, corners, and carvings. The best of materials only should be used. Oil should be sparingly applied. Spirit is to be preferred to glaze. And to ensure the work standing out bright and bearing future inspection, the varnish used should have but a small percentage of resin. When the varnish is bought ready-made, that known as best brown hard should be procured. Mix it with an equal bulk of polish before applying it to the work. To polish or repolish a shop front with a mahogany swing door, and perhaps a vestibule, is a more difficult task than polishing household furniture in the workshop or at the bench. If the woodwork is all new, it will present no difficulties to a practical polisher, provided the day is warm and bright and free from excessive damp or moisture. Then methylated spirit can be used as a solvent for the shellac, and the work will stand out bright. Damp or excessive cold will cause the polished work to chill or turn white, and then it will be advisable to use wood naphtha in place of spirits, working each rubber fairly dry and avoiding the use of spirit varnish as much as possible. In repolishing, cleanliness is most important, for it will be found that more satisfaction is given if the woodwork is clean and of an even color than if a heavy body of polish is laid on an unclean surface which has the dirt clinging in the corners, quirks, and carvings. Careful attention to this detail stamps a polisher as a good workman, and enables him truthfully to print on his trade card, "Old work repolished equal to new." Unfortunately, shop fronts are generally allowed to get into a very bad state before it is decided to incur the expense of repolishing. The polish becomes worn off the bottom rail, which is black and dirt-begrimed. The lower part of the pillars is light in color. The door is faded on the lower half, and the upper portion has only been kept from reaching the same condition by the covering of dirt which intercepts the sunlight. In such a case, the best plan would be to scrape off all the polish, smooth down with glass paper, wiping the work over with red oil, and allow it to stand the night. To make the red oil, steep 1/4 pound alkanet root in 1 pint raw linseed oil. It imparts to mahogany a rich color if allowed to stand at least 12 hours, in sunshine if possible. This work may be said to belong more properly to the shop fitter, and would practically mean placing the job in the polisher's hands as new work. This method may be deemed too expensive, and in that case we must content ourselves with gaining a clean surface by washing it down with strong soda water, 1/2 pound common washing soda to 1 gallon warm water, assisted by a little powdered pumice stone or bath brick, and using a scrubbing brush to get the dirt out of the corners, quirks, carvings, etc., afterwards swilling off with clean water and wiping dry. Should the dirt still remain and leave the corners, etc., dark in color, it may be necessary to bleach these. This is done by brushing over with weak solution of oxalic acid, 1/2 ounce to 1 pint warm water, and swilling off again with clean water. The bleached portions, when dry, must be wiped over with common malt vinegar to kill any trace of the acid, and thus prevent its eating through the polish. Now it will be possible to see exactly how the work stands. Any very light portion, if covered with a good body of polish, should have this polish removed by rubbing with No. 1 glass paper, on the face of which a little methylated spirit has been sprinkled. Then All nail holes and cracks should be stopped with putty, colored to match by mixing some Venetian red, or, better still, with beeswax and resin in equal parts, colored by the same means as the putty, and pressed in whilst hot with a piece of stick. After smoothing down the surface with worn glass paper, and wiping free from dust, the work should be wiped all over with a rag moistened with linseed oil, to enable the new polish to take more kindly to the old, and all bare portions and light-colored places should be bodied up with colored polish to equalize the shade. The whole of the work may then be treated, still using polish with a little color in it to make it look more lively. Bismarck brown is generally used as a coloring medium, but it is not always advisable to use it for outdoor work, except when the work is merely bodied up with it and finished with a clear polish. The sun's action has great influence on these brilliant reds. If exposed to the glare of sunlight, they will soon fade unless protected. It is preferable to use red sanders, though it does not look so powerful when seen in the bottle. 2 ounces of this steeped in a pint of polish and carefully strained before using will be found satisfactory. When well worked with the rubber, it will be found to gain in intensity and to enrich the work and more closely imitate the color of mahogany than does the Bismarck brown, which gives the more glaring red often seen on common furniture. Though the instructions here given are for mahogany work, they apply equally to walnut, except that the red added to the polish must not be so intense. Black work should be cleansed in the same manner as described above, and the polishing done with black polish. This can be bought as ebonite, ready-made, or a combined ebony stain and polish may be used, or it can be made by dissolving 4 ounces garnet shellac in 1 pint spirit. Its blackness will be intensified by adding 1 ounce of black aniline dye. The white polish as made from bleached shellac may be used instead if similarly dyed. The black aniline dye, soluble in spirit, which can be obtained at most shops where polishers' sundries are sold, is the proper kind for this purpose. Should any great difficulty arise, gas black is a useful substitute. Where there is any incised work to be gilded, finish the polishing before this is attempted. It is sometimes necessary to remove paint from shop fronts that have been painted on an ebonized or polished ground. The following method was adopted in a case where some mahogany shop fronts that had been painted were required to be polished in their natural color. Burning off was out of the question, owing to the glass and the liability to scorch the wood. 1 bucketful of a strong solution of freshly slaked lime, to which was added about 2 pounds common soda, 1 pound soft soap, 1/4 pint liquid ammonia was used. This, laid on with an old brush, soon softened the paint, and enabled it to be scraped off with a chisel-shaped putty knife and steel scrapers. Many applications were required, and several brushes were soon spoilt by the corrosive action of the solution, but eventually all the paint and polish was removed. The work was then bleached with oxalic acid, vinegared, red-oiled, and lastly polished with colored polish, and after 2 years' wear the job will still bear inspection. Some difficulty occurred in removing the paint from all the quirks. These, and other portions which showed themselves dark in the polishing, were touched up with Venetian red mixed in 1 part polish and 3 parts spirit, and when dry, these portions were coated with red varnish and polished. It is necessary to know how to remove the polish and varnish from the glass, because, however careful one may be in polishing, varnish is sure to get on the glass. Indeed, to ensure that the pillars, etc., have an even body on, and look well to the extreme edges, it is desirable not to study the glass. The polish can be removed when all is hard and dry by taking a sponge, wet with clean water, wiping it over the glass and polish, etc., and, whilst wet, cutting upwards with a sharp 3/4 inch or 1 inch carpenter's chisel. If care is taken to keep the glass wet and the chisel sharp, there will be no danger of scratching the glass. The following recipes may be useful in polishing shop fronts. French polish. Dissolve 4 ounces best orange shellac in 1 pint methylated spirit. Spirit varnish. Shellac 3 ounces, gum sandarac 3 ounces, mastic 1/2 ounce. Venice turpentine, 1 ounce. Camphor, 10 grams. Spirit, 20 ounces. Red oil. Alkanet root, 1/4 pound, steeped in 1 pint raw linseed oil. Red stain. 1/2 ounce Bismarck brown, dissolved in 1/2 pint spirit. A few drops to be added to the polish or varnish to make what is commonly termed red polish or red varnish. End of Chapter 14. End of Wood Finishing, Comprising Staining, Varnishing, and Polishing by Paul Hasluck.